Hey there, tonight we're diving into the most disturbing sexual practices of World War II, which you're about to discover is a reality that makes wartime romance novels seem like fairy tales. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. World War II was a chaotic clash of ideologies, a brutal showdown with enough drama to make any soap opera look like a kindergarten skit. But beyond the trenches and tanks, there was a whole other battlefield, the steamy, somewhat surreal world of sexual propaganda. Yes, in an era where countries were building atomic bombs, they were also busy crafting risque pamphlets and pin-up posters to sway hearts and minds. Because, apparently, nothing says defeat the enemy quite like a sultry poster of Betty Grable. Let's start with the star of the show, the pin-up girl. During WWII, the pin-up became iconic, a national morale booster plastered on barracks walls and airplane noses. Why? Well, a little eye candy was thought to keep soldiers motivated, a kind of visual pep talk. It's said that over 5 million pin-up calendars were distributed to troops in 1942 alone. And while it might seem absurd that a photo could keep someone fighting, it worked. These images gave soldiers a taste of home, something worth coming back to, even if it was just a fantasy. But the Allies weren't the only ones playing this game. The Axis powers had their own version of seductive propaganda. The Germans, for instance, had the Axis Sallies, radio broadcasters who used their sultry voices to demoralize Allied troops with a mix of seductive chatter and fake news. Mildred Gillers, the most famous Axis Sally, would purr into the microphone, mixing jazz tunes with psychological warfare. She was like a sinister version of a late-night DJ, trying to sow doubt and desire in equal measure. Then there were the infamous propaganda leaflets, dropped from planes like confetti at a parade. These leaflets were designed to mess with the enemy's head. Some were straightforward threats, while others took a more personal approach. Picture this, a leaflet showing a soldier's sweetheart allegedly cheating back home. The idea was to make the guy question his own side, wondering if his devotion was all for naught. But let's be honest, if you're in a foxhole with bullets flying, the last thing you really need is existential angst about your love life. Now, let's talk numbers. The British dropped over 6 billion leaflets over Europe during the war. That's a staggering amount of paper fluttering down from the sky, all in the hopes of stirring some psychological turmoil. It's a testament to the belief that words, and a little bit of titillation, can be weapons of war. And while it's hard to quantify just how effective these tactics were, they were certainly memorable. The leaflets, the pin-ups, and the sultry radio broadcasts are now etched into the bizarre tapestry of WWII history. Of course, behind these efforts was a very real understanding of human psychology. War is not just about guns and tanks, it's about the mind. The powers involved knew that soldiers needed more than just rations and rifles. They needed motivation. And sometimes, the promise of a femme fatale waiting back home was just the ticket. But there's also a darker side to this. These tactics reveal a lot about the era's attitudes towards sexuality and gender roles. Women were often reduced to mere symbols, their images used to manipulate emotions and drive men to fight. It's a reminder of how wartime propaganda didn't just reflect the battlefronts, it shaped social norms too. Let's not forget the economic side of things. Producing these materials wasn't cheap. The U.S. spent millions on its propaganda efforts, and while they were more than happy to splash the cash on bombs and bullets, they were just as willing to invest in image warfare. It's a strange juxtaposition, shelling out for pin-ups while rationing sugar and gasoline. But that was the reality of the time. War is as much about perception as it is about firepower. And what about the effectiveness of all this seductive imagery? Well, that's a mixed bag. Some argue it was crucial in maintaining morale, while others see it as a quirky footnote in the vast annals of wartime strategy. What's clear is that these tactics are a reflection of the lengths to which nations will go to win a war. They're a testament to creativity and absurdity in equal measure, a bizarre chapter in the story of the world's most devastating conflict. So, While the battlefields of Normandy and the skies over Britain were where the headlines were made, the war on hearts and minds was just as real. The seductive propaganda of WWII is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, human nature remains a potent force. And sometimes, a little cheat can make all the difference. While the war on hearts and minds played out in pin-up posters and seductive broadcasts, there was a far darker narrative unraveling simultaneously. A story that's less about titillation and more about terror. Enter the grim chapter of World War II history known as the plight of the comfort women. If you're thinking this sounds like a euphemism, you're spot on. It was a euphemism for one of the war's most chilling and systematized atrocities: the forced sexual enslavement of women across occupied territories, primarily by the Japanese Imperial Army. The scale of this operation was nothing short of staggering, an industrial-scale nightmare designed to keep soldiers satisfied, supposedly preventing them from committing mass sexual violence against civilian populations. But let's be real. It's like saying you're sending a wolf to a sheep convention to prevent it from eating the sheep. Such logic is not just flawed, it's grotesque. So, how many women are we talking about here? Estimates vary, but most historians agree that somewhere between 50,000 to 200,000 women were caught in this horrific web. These women came from Korea, China, the Philippines, and other occupied regions. The Japanese military set up what they termed comfort stations, which is just as sickeningly euphemistic as it sounds. These weren't cozy lounges, but rather forced brothels where women were brutalized daily. Now, here's where the myth-busting kicks in. For years, there was a narrative, carefully crafted and propagated, that these women were willing participants, prostitutes seeking to make a quick yen during tumultuous times. But survivor testimonies paint a drastically different picture. Consider the account of Kim Hak-sun, a Korean woman who broke the silence in 1991, vividly recalling her abduction at the age of 17. She wasn't signing up for a glamorous gig. She was kidnapped, her life forever altered by the cruelty of war. The economic implications of this system are as twisted as the practice itself. The Japanese military wasn't just running a sordid enterprise. They were also economically exploiting these women. The comfort stations charged soldiers, and while the women were supposedly paid, any semblance of compensation was often a cruel joke. Many received nothing at all, and those who did were paid in military scrip. Basically funny money only valid within the confines of the Japanese military economy. It's like being paid in Monopoly money at a real-life casino, utterly useless once the war was over. Politically, the existence of these stations was justified as a necessary evil, a wartime exigency to maintain discipline within the ranks. But the reality was far from disciplined. The stations were rife with abuse, disease, and despair. This was not about maintaining order. It was about subjugation, plain and simple. Now, let's not forget the staggering logistics behind this operation. Setting up and maintaining these comfort stations required a bureaucratic effort that would make any modern corporate franchise jealous. Transporting women across territories, establishing facilities, and coordinating military schedules was a massive undertaking. And it was all done under the guise of military necessity. If only such organizational skills were put towards something beneficial, like, I don't know, not waging war in the first place. The political fallout from this is still felt today. The issue of comfort women remains a contentious diplomatic sore point, particularly between Japan and South Korea. Efforts to reach resolution, whether through apologies or reparations, have often been met with skepticism and outrage. It's a reminder that history's ghosts don't just haunt the past. They linger, casting long shadows over present-day politics. Survivor stories are vital here, not just for the record, but as a form of resistance against the erasure of their suffering. Women like Kim Bok-dong and Jan Ruff-O'Hearn, who bravely spoke out, transformed personal trauma into public testimony, ensuring that history couldn't simply sweep their stories under the rug. Their accounts are harrowing, detailing the daily horrors faced and the physical and psychological scars that never fully heal. Debunking the myth of voluntary participation is crucial not only for historical accuracy, but also for justice. Acknowledging this atrocity involves confronting uncomfortable truths about human nature and the depths of depravity to which it can sink during war. It's not enough to view these women as mere victims. They were individuals caught in the grim machinery of war, whose voices challenge us to reflect on the past and demand accountability in the present. And let's not forget, as much as the phrase comfort women tries to soften the blow, it was anything but comforting. It's a reminder that language can be wielded as a weapon, obscuring reality and shielding perpetrators from the full weight of their crimes. The sanitized terminology used during the war served to downplay and disguise the brutality of what was truly happening. In essence, the story of the comfort women is a stark illustration of how war can warp morality and humanity. It's a tale that needs to be told and retold, not just in hushed tones of horror, but with the clarity and conviction of truth-telling. As we continue to explore the tangled web of WWII, it's essential to remember that amidst the tales of dashing heroes and daring escapades, there are also stories of unimaginable suffering and resilience that demand our attention and respect. As the ink on the grim story of comfort women continues to dry, we pivot to another equally unsettling chapter: military brothels. Yes, folks, the wartime geniuses who brought us atomic bombs and strategic bombing also dabbled in the business of organized, bureaucratic prostitution. While it might sound like the plot of a dark comedy, this was anything but funny. The military brothels, what a charming euphemism for state-sanctioned exploitation, were set up with all the efficiency of a fast food franchise, minus the golden arches, and with a side order of moral bankruptcy. Let's dive into the logistics of this peculiar wartime endeavor. Imagine a military operation dedicated not only to moving troops, but also to ensuring their recreational needs were met with military precision. The Japanese military, for example, had an intricate network of these so-called comfort stations. They weren't alone in this. Other nations also dabbled in setting up similar establishments, albeit with less institutional zeal. The Germans, during their occupation of France, turned Paris's nightlife into a bureaucratic enterprise, while the Allies weren't entirely innocent either, with some troops frequenting local brothels wherever they were stationed. The economics behind this sordid chapter were as intricate as they were unsavory. For instance, the Japanese military's comfort stations were not only a tool of control, but also a revenue generator. In some cases, soldiers were charged for their visits, with the funds funneled back into the war effort. It's like paying for your own chains, a cruel twist that added insult to injury. The cost of setting up and maintaining these operations was significant, involving everything from transportation of individuals to the construction and upkeep of facilities. And let's not gloss over the fact that many of these women were trafficked against their will, a human cost that far outweighed any ledger's bottom line. Now, bureaucratic framework behind these brothels was nothing short of astonishing. Military officials crafted detailed regulations, quotas, and schedules to ensure maximum efficiency. It's as if they took the same meticulous planning used for battle strategies and applied it to the most dehumanizing of enterprises. This wasn't just a dark corner of military life. It was a well-oiled machine, churning with the same cold precision you'd expect from a wartime supply chain. The irony here is thick enough to cut with a bayonet. The same minds orchestrating tactical victories were also orchestrating systemic abuses. But how did military officials justify this? Well, the rationalizations were as varied as they were appalling. Some argued it was a necessary measure to prevent the spread of sexually transmitted infections among troops, while others claimed it helped maintain discipline and morale. It's a bit like saying you're organizing a bar fight to prevent violence, an inherently flawed logic that ignores the root of the problem. These rationalizations also conveniently overlooked the profound trauma inflicted on the women involved, reducing them to mere cogs in the war machine. And what about the broader societal implications? Well, the existence of these brothels reflected and reinforced the era's deeply entrenched gender norms. Women were often seen as mere accessories to male desire, their autonomy and dignity overshadowed by the supposed needs of soldiers. This wasn't just about fulfilling a base instinct. It was a calculated exploitation that mirrored the darker sides of wartime ideologies. The men in charge might have been able to compartmentalize these actions at the time, but the echoes of their decisions are still felt today, as nations grapple with the historical wounds left by such policies. Transporting women and setting up facilities demanded a level of organization that could have been borrowed from logistics textbooks. The military didn't just stumble into these operations. They planned them with the same diligence as any military campaign. Whether it was arranging transport routes or managing medical inspections, there was a chilling efficiency in how these brothels were run. It's a reminder of how war can warp priorities and justify the unjustifiable under the guise of necessity. The moral blind spots of the era are as glaring as they are troubling. In a time when human lives were often reduced to statistics, it's easy to see how the humanity of these women was overlooked. Yet, the bureaucratic nature of these operations also hints at a deeper, more unsettling truth. This wasn't just about wartime pragmatism. It was about control. The brothels served as a mechanism to regulate soldiers' behavior, a way to keep them in line while simultaneously exploiting the most vulnerable. In the end, the story of military brothels is a dark tapestry woven with threads of exploitation, bureaucracy, and moral ambiguity. It's a chapter of history that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and the lengths to which individuals and institutions will go in the pursuit of control. As we continue to unravel the complex web of WWII sexual practices, it's crucial to remember that behind every statistic and policy were real people, whose lives were irrevocably altered by the machinations of war. And as history has shown us time and again, these stories are not just relics of the past, but lessons for the future, a cautionary tale of what happens when humanity is sacrificed on the altar of expediency. As we pivot from the grim mechanics of military brothels, let's slip into something a bit more glamorous, yet equally fraught with peril. Welcome to the world of WWII espionage, where the art of seduction wasn't just a romantic subplot, but a sophisticated tool of warfare. Now, before you picture James Bond suavely sipping martinis while whispering state secrets, let's peel back the curtain on the real deal. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all tuxedos and Aston Martins. Espionage during WWII was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, where spies employed every trick in the book, including the seductive kind. Think less smooth operator and more desperate measures. These were folks who risked their lives in the shadowy alleyways of wartime Europe, using flirtation as a form of currency to extract secrets or plant misinformation. It wasn't glamorous. It was gritty, dangerous work, and those involved often faced dire consequences. One of the most infamous femme fatales of the era was Mata Hari, although she was actually a relic from WWII. Her legacy, however, loomed large over the espionage landscape of WWII. Real name Margaretha Geertruida Zell, she was a Dutch exotic dancer and courtesan, executed by firing squad in 1917 for allegedly spying for Germany. Her tale is the stuff of legend, often romanticized beyond recognition. Yet, in reality, her espionage skills were questionable, and her conviction stemmed more from paranoia than proof. But Mata Hari's story, with its intoxicating mix of intrigue and sensuality, set the stage for a new kind of warfare where seduction could be as potent as a well-placed bomb. Fast forward to WWII, and we meet Christine Granville, a Polish-born British agent whose exploits read like a spy novel. Known for her charisma and courage, Granville used her charm to gather intelligence and facilitate the escape of prisoners from Nazi-occupied territories. But let's not sugarcoat it. Her work was incredibly risky. Captured several times, she escaped execution by wits and sheer nerve. Her story is a stark reminder that while seduction sounds glamorous, the reality was a life perpetually balanced on a knife's edge. And then there's the tale of Joséphine Baker, the African-American singer who found fame in France and became a spy for the French resistance. Armed with charm and a knack for memorizing information, Baker smuggled secrets written in invisible ink on her sheet music. She was a heady mix of celebrity and spy. Imagine Beyoncé trading in her stage for a cloak and dagger operation. While her work was undeniably dangerous, it also underscores how espionage was about leveraging every available asset, including fame and allure. But let's debunk some myths here. Despite the allure of the seductive spy, most espionage work was mind-numbingly mundane, involving hours of surveillance, code-breaking, and report writing. The romanticized image of spies sipping cocktails while trading secrets is mostly Hollywood gloss. The real deal was often a grueling grind, with agents facing constant threats of exposure, torture, or execution. And let's not forget the economic side. Espionage required funding, and the Allies and Axis powers poured millions into their intelligence networks. It's a reminder that while the human element was crucial, espionage was also a business, with all the logistical headaches that entailed. The myth of the seductive spy also glosses over the harsh realities faced by women in these roles. While their allure was undeniably an asset, it often came with the expectation of using their sexuality as a tool, blurring lines between agency and exploitation. The tale of Violette Charbot, a British-French agent, is a case in point. Charbot's missions were fraught with danger, and she was eventually captured and executed by the Nazis. Her story, like so many others, highlights the brutal truth that seduction in espionage was often less about glamour and more about survival. Economically, espionage was a complex beast, requiring vast resources for training, equipment, and operations. The British Special Operations Executive, SO, alone employed thousands and spent millions on clandestine activities. And while the returns on these investments could be significant, think of the intelligence coups that altered the course of battles. They were far from guaranteed. The world of espionage was one of high risk, and at times, modest reward, a constant gamble that could pay off big or end in disaster. Politically, the use of seduction in espionage reflected the broader wartime ethos of whatever it takes. It was a time when traditional norms were upended, and necessity often dictated morality. This pragmatism also exposed the gender dynamics at play, with women frequently seen as tools rather than equals in the intelligence game. Yet, despite these challenges, many female spies left an indelible mark on history, their stories a testament to courage under fire. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. The risk of betrayal loomed large, as double agents lurked within every network. The infamous case of Kim Philby, a high-ranking member of British intelligence who was actually a Soviet spy, illustrates the precariousness of trust in the espionage world. Philby's ability to deceive his colleagues for decades underscores the double-edged nature of seduction and charm in espionage. It could be a tool or a trap. As we delve deeper into the world of WWII espionage, it's clear that the intersection of seduction and intelligence was as much about survival as it was about success. The seductive spy archetype, while rooted in some truth, belies the harsh realities of a profession fraught with danger and moral ambiguity. These agents, caught in a web of secrets and lies, navigated a shadowy world where every interaction could be a matter of life or death. It's a reminder that while the allure of espionage is undeniable, the gritty truth is often far more complex and compelling than any Hollywood script. So, as we continue to unravel the tangled threads of WWII lesser-known tales, remember that behind the legends and myths are real people, living on the edge. Their stories a blend of bravery, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of a cause greater than themselves. And as we leave the world of espionage for now, let's keep our eyes peeled for the next twist in the tale, where history's shadows reveal yet more secrets waiting to be uncovered. As we close the book on WWII espionage and its seductive allure, it's time to step back and gaze at the sprawling canvas of wartime tactics and their enduring legacies. You know, those moments when history shakes off its dust and whispers, "Remember me." Because the truth is, these stories of pin-up girls, comfort women, military brothels, and seductive spies didn't just vanish into the sands of time. They left cultural footprints that still mark our present, shaping not just our understanding of the past, but the ethical landscape we navigate today. Let's start with the pin-up phenomena. Those tantalizing posters weren't just WWII morale boosters. They were the prelude to a post-war cultural explosion that catapulted figures like Marilyn Monroe into the international spotlight. The idea of the glamorous icon, crystallized during the war, seeped into post-war media, influencing everything from film to advertising. It's like the pin-up culture planted a seed that blossomed into the modern obsession with celebrity. And yes, even today, when you see a magazine cover featuring the latest pop sensation, you can trace a line back to those barracks where a Betty Grable poster was pinned up with nothing more than a nail and some wishful thinking. However, This isn't just a quaint walk down memory lane. Oh no. The darker side of wartime sexual politics, particularly the horror of comfort women, casts a long shadow over contemporary international relations. This isn't just a historical footnote. It's a diplomatic minefield that still influences relations, especially between Japan and its neighboring countries. The debate over apologies and reparations rages on, a constant reminder that reconciliation is as much about acknowledging the past as it is about shaping the future. The cries for justice echo louder than the bombs of the past, demanding that we confront these uncomfortable truths. From an ethical standpoint, these wartime practices forced nations to face the music when it came to human rights. The Geneva Conventions, which were expanded post-WWII, didn't just pop out of a vacuum. They were born from the brutal lessons of the war, where the lines between combatant and civilian were blurred beyond recognition. International law had to evolve, not just to prevent another global conflict, but to ensure that the horrors of military brothels and forced enslavements remained in the past, never to rear their ugly heads again. And then we have espionage, with its mix of glamour and grit, continuing to shape narratives in both real life and fiction. The Cold War, just a few years after WWII, took the espionage baton and ran with it, further embedding spies into the cultural psyche. But this time, it was less about seduction and more about ideology. The lessons learned from WWII espionage about loyalty, betrayal, and the high stakes of information warfare laid the groundwork for future intelligence operations. The fact that we still find espionage stories so compelling is a testament to the dangerous allure of a world where shadows dance with secrets. Economically, the war efforts channeled resources into areas previously unexplored, pushing technological boundaries with innovations that have become the bedrock of today's modern world. The same economies that once churned out military propaganda now spend billions crafting the narratives of peace, diplomacy, and international cooperation. It's a delicious irony that the tools of war have been repurposed for peace, a reminder that the machines of destruction can also sow the seeds of reconciliation. Politically, the aftermath of WWII ushered in a new era of international collaboration. The United Nations, established in 1945, was an attempt to harness the collective memory of the war's devastation and channel it into a force for global stability. The UN's efforts to address human rights abuses, such as those experienced by comfort women, highlight a commitment to ensuring that the lessons of history are not just learned, but acted upon. However, history has a habit of repeating itself if left unchecked, and so the vigilance of international watchdogs remains more crucial than ever. Yet, for all the progress, the specters of the past occasionally slip through the cracks of our modern consciousness, reminding us that history is not just a record of what was, but a guide to what could be. It's a sobering thought that while WWII sexual dynamics were often swept under the rug, their legacies are still being swept up today in the ongoing battles for gender equality and human rights. The war might have ended in 1945, but the echoes of its moral complexities and ethical dilemmas resonate with each new generation. In wrapping up this whirlwind tour of WWII lesser-known tales, we're left with a tapestry woven from threads of bravery, tragedy, and resilience. Each story, whether of a seductive spy or a comfort woman, contributes to the broader narrative of human capacity for both cruelty and compassion. And it's in this tension, between what was and what could be, that we find our true inheritance from the past. So, as you tuck this knowledge away, consider the importance of remembering these darker chapters, not just as cautionary tales, but as beacons guiding us toward a future where history's lessons are not merely echoes, but actions that shape a better world. Because, at the end of the day, understanding history is about more than just knowing the facts. It's about learning the lessons, embracing the stories, and making sure the past doesn't just repeat itself, but helps us write a better future. And that, my friends, is perhaps the most powerful legacy of all. Out in the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where today's Google Maps would struggle with pronunciation, lies the ancient realm of Mesopotamia. And if you're thinking this place sounds like a swanky antique dealer's dream, you're not wrong. But back in the day, it was the jackpot of ancient real estate, known to us as the Fertile Crescent. This crescent-shaped oasis was a literal cradle of civilization, and not just because it was shaped like a giant baby rocker. Here, humans decided they were done with the whole nomadic lifestyle. They want to settle down, plant some crops, and maybe build a ziggurat or two. Now, you might ask why here? Why not some sunny beach in the Mediterranean? The answer is dirt. Really fertile dirt. The kind of rich soil that would make a modern-day farmer weep with joy. The annual floods from those big rivers dumped nutrient-rich silt all over the plains, and voila, you had lands perfect for agriculture. Around 4,500 BCE, people started to figure this out, and the Sumerians were among the first to trade in their spears for plows. They built city-states like Ur and Uruk that were the ancient equivalents of urban powerhouses. The Sumerians probably never imagined their legacy would be remembered with such gravity, but hey, the clay tablets don't lie. Speaking of clay tablets, let's talk about the Sumerians' grand technological leap: writing. Cuneiform was the name of the game, and these ancient scribes were the hipster tweeters of their day. Instead of 280 characters, they had a stylus and a lump of clay. Sure, it seems archaic now, but think of the clay tablet as the original hard drive, just a bit more breakable. And while we're busting myths, let's clear up that cuneiform wasn't all about epic tales of gods and kings. Most of it was mundane stuff, like accounting for bushels of barley or sheep. Yep, even 5,000 years ago, bureaucracy was a thing. Now, let's not forget the architectural gems of these city-states. Ziggurats, the ancient skyscrapers, were like the Sumerians' way of saying, hey, look at us. These multi-tiered behemoths were religious centers, and each city-state had its own ziggurat dedicated to a patron deity. Think of them as ancient cloud-busters, towering over mud-brick houses and bustling market squares. They might not have had elevators or penthouse suites, but they certainly had views. The ziggurat of Ur, for example, was a massive structure that stood about 70 feet tall. Sure, by today's standards, it's no Burj Khalifa, but in 2100 BCE, it was pretty impressive. Economically, these early city-states were humming like a well-oiled machine. Barley was the currency of choice, and trade routes stretched from the Persian Gulf to Anatolia. But life wasn't all barley and ziggurats. The political landscape was as turbulent as the floodwaters that sustained their crops. Rulers like Gilgamesh, who was likely a real king of Uruk around 2700 BCE, were part hero, part politician, and part divine representative. His tales are epic, sure, but living up to them was a whole different saga. But let's not get too romantic. Life in ancient Mesopotamia wasn't all poetry and pyramids. It was a tough world, with city-states often at war over resources, and power shifts were as frequent as the river floods. The Sumerians were eventually overshadowed by the Akkadians, who decided they liked the Sumerian setup, but could do it with a bit more pizzazz and a lot more military might. In this land of contrast and contradiction, where people were just figuring out the basics of civilization, the Sumerians and their successors laid the groundwork for pretty much everything we take for granted today. From the wheel to legal codes, they were the original overachievers. But let's not put them on too high a pedestal. After all, they didn't invent sliced bread just yet. And speaking of overachievements, let's not overlook the economic miracle that was Mesopotamia's agriculture. It's like the ancient equivalent of Silicon Valley, but with more mud and fewer hoodies. The Sumerians weren't just dabbling in farming, they were the original agri-innovators. The secret: irrigation. Before these guys came along, farming was more of a high-stakes gamble with nature. But with clever engineering, they turned the Tigris and Euphrates into reliable partners in their agricultural enterprise. These rivers weren't just flowing bodies of water. They were the lifelines of the Mesopotamian economy, providing the liquid gold that made fields flourish. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Around 3000 BCE, the Sumerians were busy digging canals and ditches like there was no tomorrow. This wasn't just a case of build it and they will come. It was more like dig it and you'll eat. They knew that controlling water meant controlling crops, and controlling crops meant controlling power. It was a system that thrived on the back of barley, the ancient world's version of cold, hard cash. Forget gold. In Mesopotamia, barley was the bling everyone wanted. But let's pause to debunk a myth here. Mesopotamia wasn't swimming in wealth like some ancient Scrooge McDuck. Sure, they had the Fertile Crescent. But farming back then was back-breaking work. Picture this: endless hours in the sun, bent over fields, praying the irrigation system didn't fail and turn your crop into a mud pie. The romantic notion of Mesopotamia as an endless paradise of plenty. Yeah, not quite. Farmers faced threats from floods, droughts, and the occasional invasion by a neighboring city-state eager to expand their barley empire. Enter the wheel. No, not the TV show, although that's got its own ancient appeal. Around 3500 BCE, someone in Mesopotamia had a light bulb moment. Except, without actual light bulbs. The invention of the wheel was like giving the economy a turbo boost. It revolutionized transport and trade, making it easier to move goods across those vast, muddy landscapes. Suddenly, merchants could transport their barley and other goods faster, farther, and with less effort. Imagine the joy of a merchant who didn't have to rely on a donkey with a mind of its own. This brings us neatly to the rise of the merchant class. These were the ancient hustlers, the movers and shakers of their time. They weren't just trading barley, they were the lifeblood of the Mesopotamian economy. From textiles to metals, they exchanged goods across a network that reached as far as the Indus Valley and Egypt. Picture the ancient version of a linked-in network, but with more camels and less corporate jargon. Let's talk trade routes. Mesopotamian merchants were the Indiana Joneses of their day, braving deserts and mountains to bring home the goods. They traveled through the Persian Gulf, up the rivers, and across land routes that would make a modern GPS short-circuit. And what did they bring back? Copper from Oman, timber from the Levant, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. A gemstone so blue it was like the ancient world's version of Instagram filters. But before we start thinking of these merchants as ancient millionaires, let's get real. Trade was risky business. A sandstorm could wipe out a caravan, bandits lurked on every route, and prices fluctuated like a Mesopotamian stock market. Plus, taxes were a thing even back then, with city-states eager to take their cut from the hard-working traders. The romantic image of the wealthy merchant in flowing robes. Sure, that existed, but so did the exhausted trader just trying to make it home before the next sandstorm hit. And let's not forget the gritty reality of the fields. For every merchant living the high life, there were countless farmers toiling away, hoping for a good harvest. It was a life of uncertainty, with the whims of nature and politics always looming. When the floods were good, life was good. When they weren't, well, you might find yourself wondering if the nomadic lifestyle wasn't so bad after all. So, next time you're in a grocery store aisle, surrounded by neatly stacked produce, spare a thought for those ancient barley farmers. They didn't just feed a city, they fed an entire civilization. Their work laid the foundation for economic systems that would shape the world for millennia. It's a legacy etched in the clay tablets, scribbled in cuneiform, and whispered through the ages. And while we're on the subject of legacies, let's not forget the political landscape. Mesopotamia wasn't just an economic powerhouse. It was a hotbed of political intrigue. City-states like Lagash and Kish were forever jockeying for position. Alliances were as fluid as the rivers, and wars over resources were as common as Mesopotamian sand. But more on that drama next time, because in Mesopotamia, just like in your favorite TV show, there's always another plot twist waiting in the wings. Now, speaking of political intrigue and city-state drama, let's take a stroll down the dusty streets of ancient Mesopotamia and see how the folks were living their best, or maybe just their most interesting, lives. Picture a society where social life and culture were as interwoven as the intricate textiles they traded. These Mesopotamians weren't just about hard work and harder bargains. They knew how to throw a party and make a statement, one beard at a time. Let's start with fashion because, let's face it, what's civilization without a little sartorial flair? In Mesopotamia, clothing was more than just a way to cover up. It was a social stratum in fabric form. Linen and wool were the materials of choice, with the more affluent citizens swaddling themselves in layers of intricately woven garments. Forget the fashion magazines. Back then, the streets were the runways, and everyone was judging your hem length and beard grooming. Speaking of beards, they were the ultimate status symbol. The longer and more elaborately curled, the higher up the social ladder you likely stood. Men spent as much time on their beards as modern influencers do on their Instagram feeds. Sculpted with precision, these facial masterpieces were the Mesopotamian equivalent of a power suit. One could argue that the beard wars of the time were as fierce as any battle for territory, but it wasn't all fun and facial hair. Life in the bustling city-states of and Uruk was a mix of hard work and social obligation. The streets buzzed with activity, from merchants hawking goods in crowded bazaars to scribes meticulously documenting transactions on clay tablets. These ancient spreadsheets were crucial because no one wanted to be shortchanged on their barley. The markets were the heart of social life, where gossip flowed as freely as goods. Imagine the ancient version of Twitter, but with more goats and fewer trolls. Now, let's chat about the role of women in this ancient scene. While it might be tempting to assume that women were relegated to the background, Mesopotamia proves otherwise. Women had rights, and not just the right to bake bread and raise kids. They could own property, run businesses, and even become priestesses or scribes. In fact, some of the earliest known authors were women from Mesopotamia, like Enheduanna, a high priestess and poet whose works are still studied today. Sure, they weren't exactly marching for equal pay, but the presence of women in various sectors of society was a testament to their influence. That said, the ladies of Mesopotamia still faced plenty of hurdles. Their roles might have been more progressive than some might expect, but they were still navigating a world where men held most of the cards. And let's not forget the legal system, which was less about blind justice and more about making sure everyone knew their place. Enter Hammurabi, the ancient PR maestro, who decided that what Mesopotamia needed was a comprehensive set of laws. The Code of Hammurabi, circa 1754 BCE, was a collection of 282 laws inscribed on a stone stele for everyone to see, or dodge, depending on your social standing. These laws covered everything from trade disputes to marriage, and they were as strict as they were specific. The famous eye for an eye principle wasn't just a figure of speech. It was a literal approach to justice. If you thought getting a parking ticket today was harsh, imagine living under a system where stealing could cost you a hand. But let's give Hammurabi some credit. His code was an early attempt at creating a unified legal framework that everyone had to follow, regardless of their social status. Sure, the punishments might seem draconian by today's standards, but in a world where personal vendettas could spiral into full-blown feuds, having a common set of rules was revolutionary. Plus, it wasn't all doom and gloom. There were protections for the poor and even some rights for women, a nod to the complex social fabric of the time. So, while Hammurabi might not have been winning any humanitarian awards, his legal code was a step toward a more organized society. And in a place where city-states were constantly clashing, having a semblance of order was probably a welcome relief. Of course, whether people actually followed these laws to the letter is another story. Human nature being what it is, there were probably plenty of folks finding creative ways to skirt the rules. In the end, life in ancient Mesopotamia was a tapestry of contradictions. A place where progress and tradition danced a delicate waltz, where the boundaries of civilization were constantly pushed and pulled by the tides of human ambition. It was a world that laid the groundwork for so much of what we take for granted today, from legal systems to urban living. And while the faces have changed, the stories of ambition, power, and resilience remain timeless. As we wrap up this segment, let's not forget that the story of Mesopotamia is far from over. There are still more layers to peel back, more myths to bust, and more truths to uncover. Whether it's the rise and fall of empires or the daily lives of ordinary people, each part of this ancient world offers a new perspective on what it means to be human. So, stay tuned as we continue this journey through time, unraveling the tales of the past with a wink and a nod to the present. And speaking of the human saga, let's dive headfirst into the drama that was ancient Mesopotamian politics. If you thought today's political landscape was a minefield, try navigating the power plays of the Akkadian and Babylonian empires. Forget Netflix. This was the original political thriller, complete with betrayal, ambition, and the odd assassination or two. Picture this. It's around 2334 BCE, and a man named Sargon is about to shake things up in a way that would make any modern political strategist nod in appreciation. Sargon of Akkad, a name that rolls off the tongue like a medieval battle cry, is one of history's first empire builders. He's the kind of guy who could walk into a room and make everyone else feel like they were playing checkers while he was playing chess. Sargon didn't just want to rule, He wanted to dominate, and he did just that by uniting the city-states of Sumer under one banner and forming the Akkadian Empire. Now, here's the myth-busting part. While Sargon's rise is often painted as a heroic tale, the reality was less about noble conquest and more about strategic manipulation. Alliances formed and broke like cheap pottery, and city-states were gobbled up faster than you could say ziggurat. Sargon's empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, an impressive feat for the time. But rather than a benevolent ruler guiding his people, think of Sargon as the original corporate raider, leveraging power plays and military might to consolidate his hold. As with any empire worth its salt, the Akkadian Empire didn't last forever. Fast forward a couple of centuries, and the empire crumbled under the weight of internal strife and external pressure from the Gutians, invaders who saw the writing on the clay tablets and decided they wanted a piece of the action. The lesson here: even the mightiest of empires can fall, especially when they are built on shaky alliances and overextended resources. Enter the Babylonians, who decided that if Sargon could do it, so could they, but with a bit more style. Babylon, a name synonymous with grandeur and excess, rose to power under the leadership of Hammurabi, our law-loving friend from earlier. By 1750 BCE, Hammurabi had expanded Babylon's influence across Mesopotamia, crafting an empire that was the envy of its neighbors. But let's not get too swept away by tales of splendor. These were times of ruthless calculus. The Babylonians, like their Akkadian predecessors, played the game of thrones with a dexterity that would make any modern diplomat squirm. The Babylonians were known for their impressive city planning and monumental architecture, but behind the brick and mortar lay a society constantly at war with itself and others. Hammurabi might have been a lawmaker, but he was also a warrior king who understood that power wasn't just about having a fancy palace. It was about maintaining control over a sprawling, diverse population. His code wasn't just about justice. It was about keeping order in a chaotic world. And when it came to rivals, Hammurabi wasn't above a bit of good old-fashioned conquest. Of course, the Babylonians weren't the only ones playing the imperial game. Around 1595 BCE, the Hittites swooped in from Anatolia, sacking Babylon in a move that would make any history buff's head spin. It was a classic case of what goes around comes around, with the Hittites briefly claiming the throne before retreating, leaving a power vacuum that would see the rise of the Kassites. The political landscape of Mesopotamia was as volatile as the Tigris in flood season, each new contender bringing its own flavor of governance and intrigue. And let's not overlook the Assyrians, the militaristic neighbors who played the long game, eventually building one of the most feared empires of the ancient world. The Assyrians took the concept of might makes right to new heights, with a military machine that was the envy and terror of their contemporaries. Forget the romanticized image of benevolent rulers. The Assyrians were all about efficiency and domination, using siege warfare and psychological tactics to keep their subjects in line. Their capital, Nineveh, was a testament to their power, with grand palaces and libraries that showcased their achievements and their ruthless approach to empire building. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of conquest. The truth is, life under these empires wasn't all gilded thrones and flowing wine. For the average Mesopotamian, it was a life of toil, taxes, and the ever-present threat of war. Empires rose and fell, but the daily grind continued, with farmers plowing fields, merchants trading goods, and scribes recording it all on clay tablets that have survived the millennia. In this land of contrasts, where the ambitions of kings clashed with the realities of life, Mesopotamia's legacy was forged. It was a world where power was as transient as the shifting sands, where alliances were as sturdy as a paper umbrella, and where the quest for dominance was an eternal dance. The myths and legends that have come down to us might paint these rulers as larger-than-life figures, but beneath the surface, they were as human as anyone today, flawed, ambitious, and forever reaching for the stars. As we wrap up this chapter of intrigue and empire, remember that Mesopotamia's story is far from finished. The tapestry of history is woven with threads of power and ambition, of triumph and tragedy, and as we continue this journey into the past, there's sure to be more excitement and revelation waiting just around the corner. Stay tuned, dear listener, as we peel back the layers of time and uncover the secrets of the ancients, one story at a time. So, as we peel back the layers of Mesopotamia's legacy, let's dive into the intellectual feats that would make even today's scholars break a sweat. Brace yourself for a mind-bending ride through the realms of mathematics and astronomy, where ancient Mesopotamians were the original mathletes and stargazers, long before calculators and telescopes entered the scene. You see, to them, math wasn't just about counting sheep, though yes, livestock accounting was indeed a thing. It was about unlocking the mysteries of the universe and establishing order in a world that could be as unpredictable as the Tigris in flood season. First up, let's talk numbers. The Sumerians, those early overachievers, developed a base 60 numeral system around 3000 BCE. Yep, that's right, base 60. Think about it next time you're telling time or measuring angles, because that's where we get the 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle. So, the next time you're struggling with mental math, just remember that these guys were doing complex calculations while their neighbors were still figuring out how to spell cuneiform. And it wasn't just about the numbers. The Babylonians took math to a whole new level. They were the Pythagoreans before Pythagoras was even a gleam in his great-great-grandfather's eye. Around 1800 BCE, Babylonian scribes were solving quadratic equations and even dabbling in some early trigonometry. They managed all this without a single graphing calculator, just good old clay tablets and styluses. It's enough to make you wonder if they had some secret ancient version of caffeine to keep them going. Now, onto the stars. When it came to astronomy, Mesopotamians weren't just gazing at the night sky for fun. They were mapping it out like a cosmic GPS. By 1000 BCE, they had identified the zodiac and could predict eclipses. No small feat when you're working with nothing but a keen eye and a lot of patience. They meticulously tracked the movements of planets and stars, recording their observations on clay tablets. In fact, their astronomical records were so detailed that they were still being used by Greek astronomers centuries later. Let's just say, if ancient stargazing were an Olympic sport, the Mesopotamians would have taken home the gold. But why did this matter? Well, for starters, it allowed them to create one of the first calendars, vital for predicting the annual floods and planning agricultural activities. Imagine trying to run a farming society without knowing when the rains would come, and you thought coordinating a calendar invite was hard. Plus, their astronomical prowess gave a cosmic legitimacy to the rulers who claimed divine sanction based on celestial phenomena. It was the ultimate way to say, the stars are on my side, without the need for fortune cookies. Of course, it wasn't all starry-eyed wonder. Mesopotamian astronomy was also about practicalities, like navigation and, of course, astrology. Yes, even back then, people wanted to know if Mercury was in retrograde. In a world where the future was as stable as a sandcastle in a sandstorm, astrology offered a semblance of control, a way to find meaning in the vast, unpredictable universe. But what lessons can we draw from this ancient cradle of civilization? For one, it's a humbling reminder of human ingenuity. These were people who took the chaos of daily life and imposed structure and understanding. Whether through laws, math, or the stars, they transformed the world around them into something that made sense, a trait that resonates throughout human history. It's a testament to our eternal quest for knowledge, our relentless drive to peek behind the curtain of the universe and make sense of the chaos. And what about their flaws? Let's be real. Mesopotamia wasn't a utopia. It was a land of contradictions, where the same innovations that brought prosperity also fueled conflict. The city-state rivalries, the rise and fall of empires, the constant jockeying for power. These were as much a part of their story as the ziggurats and cuneiform tablets. It's a stark reminder that progress often comes with a cost, and that human nature, with its ambitions and failings, remains unchanged. As we wrap up our journey through the dust and drama of ancient Mesopotamia, let's take a moment to marvel at their enduring legacy. From the mundane to the magnificent, their contributions continue to echo through time, shaping the world in ways they could never have imagined. They were the pioneers of civilization, the original trailblazers who showed us that even in the harshest of environments, humanity can thrive. So, the next time you glance at a clock or gaze up at the stars, spare a thought for those ancient scribes and stargazers. They might not have had Netflix to binge on, but they certainly set the stage for a world where anything seems possible. And with that, dear listener, we wrap up our journey through Mesopotamia, a land of epic tales, mathematical marvels, and cosmic wonders. As we bid farewell to the Fertile Crescent, let's carry forward the spirit of curiosity and resilience that defined this remarkable civilization. Because in the end, history isn't just about the past. It's a story we continue to write each day, one discovery at a time. So stay curious, keep exploring, and remember, the next chapter is always waiting to be uncovered. Yunnan, 1371. A baby boy named Mahi is born into a Muslim family, blissfully unaware that his life is about to resemble a dramatic plot twist from a historical soap opera. Little did his parents know, their son was destined for a life far more adventurous than growing up in a landlocked province known for its mountains rather than its maritime prowess. Now, if you asked young Ma what he wanted to be when he grew up, eunuch probably wasn't at the top of his list. But history has a funny way of making plans for you. Fast forward a few short years, and Mahi's life takes a sharp left turn. When he's around 10 years old, the Ming Dynasty's army rolls into Yunnan, and let's just say they weren't there for the scenic vistas. The Ming, keen to consolidate power, capture Mahi and haul him off to the imperial capital, Nanjing. As if being uprooted wasn't enough, he's castrated, a brutal custom to ensure absolute loyalty to the emperor. Not exactly the career starter you'd dream of, but in a bizarre twist, this was his ticket to the big leagues. In the palace, Mahi, now known as Zheng, begins his unlikely rise. It turns out that being a eunuch in the Ming court had its perks. With no family ties, eunuchs were considered trustworthy administrators, and Zheng quickly proves himself as more than just a reliable bureaucrat. He's got brains, brawn, and a knack for making the right friends. Enter Zhu Dai, the fourth son of the Ming emperor. The two form a bond stronger than steel. Think of them as the original power couple of the Ming court. Zhu Dai sees potential in Zheng, recognizing him as a man who could handle more than just palace intrigue. When Zhu Dai eventually pulls off a coup d'etat in 1402, overthrowing his own nephew to become the Yongle emperor, it's Zheng who stands by his side, sword in hand. It's a bit like being the best man at a particularly bloody wedding. This loyalty pays off in spades, as the new emperor rewards Zheng with a promotion, tasking him with commanding the most ambitious naval expeditions China has ever seen. But before we dive into those epic voyages, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer, jaw-dropping serendipity of it all. A Yunnanese Muslim boy turned court eunuch is now poised to become the face of Chinese naval dominance. Talk about climbing the ladder, or in this case, the mast. Zheng rise is a masterclass in navigating the treacherous waters of Ming politics. His journey from a small village to the bustling corridors of power was fueled by more than just luck. In a world where family connections were often the golden ticket, Zheng relied on his wits and charm. His transformation from Mahi to Zheng is a testament to the curious blend of fate and skill. The name change itself is symbolic, as Zheng was bestowed upon him by the emperor, signifying his new identity and allegiance. It's a bit like getting knighted, minus the sword-tapping ceremony. But let's not romanticize this too much. The life of a eunuch, even one as successful as Zheng, was no bed of roses. The court was a snake pit filled with backstabbers and sycophants, and one wrong move could land you in the emperor's bad books, or worse, the executioner's list. The stakes were high, and the margins for error razor-thin. Yet, Zheng navigated this treacherous environment with the deftness of a seasoned mariner steering through a storm. The Ming Dynasty itself was a complex beast. Established in 1368, was a time of relative stability and economic prosperity, but also of immense ambition. The Yongle Emperor, Zhu Dai, was particularly keen on projecting power beyond China's borders. He wanted the world to know that the Middle Kingdom was not just a land of silk and porcelain, but also a naval powerhouse. That's where Zheng's story really begins to take off, pun intended. This period was one of contrasts, opulent palaces and grand ambitions on the one hand, and harsh realities and ruthless politics on the other. The Ming court was a place where dreams could turn into nightmares faster than you could say imperial decree. For Zheng, each day was a balancing act, a careful navigation through a labyrinth of intrigue and ambition. Yet amid this cutthroat environment, Zheng remained a stoic figure, his eyes set on the horizon. His early experiences in Yunnan, coupled with his Muslim heritage, gave him a unique perspective in the Ming court, a perspective that would eventually inform his approach to international diplomacy and trade. You see, Zheng wasn't just about ships and sails. He was also about people and politics, understanding the importance of forging alliances and fostering goodwill. As we chart Zheng's early course, it's clear that his background and experiences prepared him for the challenges ahead. His story is one of transformation and adaptation, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to overcome adversity. From a captured boy to an influential court figure, Zheng's journey is nothing short of extraordinary, setting the stage for his legendary voyages that would soon follow. So, as he stands on the brink of maritime history, one can't help but wonder, did he ever imagine his life would lead him to the helm of the most magnificent fleet the world had ever seen? And so, as Zheng stood poised at the helm of what would soon be the most grandiose naval operation in history, he probably didn't have time to ponder his extraordinary journey from Yunnan to the high seas. He was too busy preparing for the logistical behemoth that was the Ming treasure fleet. This was no mere pleasure cruise, folks. We're talking 317 ships, each one a floating testament to China's ambition, packed with 27,000 men ready to chart unknown waters. To put this in perspective, Christopher Columbus would eventually embark on his so-called voyage of discovery with just 3 ships and around 90 men. In short, Zheng's fleet could have swallowed Columbus's whole and still had room for dessert. Now let's talk numbers, because the sheer scale of this operation is worthy of a blockbuster movie budget. The treasure ships, or Bao-Chuan, were the stars of this maritime show. These colossal vessels measured up to 400 feet long and 160 feet wide, with 9 masts towering over the decks. Imagine a floating fortress, something that could cast a shadow over the coastline and strike awe or terror into the hearts of anyone watching from the shore. And that's before we even get into the support ships, warships, supply ships, and water tankers, all part of the entourage ensuring the fleet's survival and success. But here's the kicker. The fleet wasn't just about showing off China's naval prowess or scaring the daylights out of unsuspecting coastal communities. Nope, the real goal was much more nuanced. Emperor Yongle wasn't just interested in flaunting his maritime muscle. His ambitions were as layered as a Ming Dynasty lacquer box. On the surface, these voyages were diplomatic missions, meant to showcase the glory of the Middle Kingdom to distant lands. But beneath the gilded exterior was a shrewd strategy to establish trade routes, secure alliances, and perhaps sprinkle a little imperial influence along the way. The first voyage, launched in 1405, set sail from the bustling port of Nanjing, heading towards the unknown with the confidence of a teenager who's just gotten their driver's license. The fleet navigated through the treacherous waters of the South China Sea, making its way to Champa, modern-day Vietnam, Java, and Sumatra. The logistics of moving an armada of this magnitude were staggering, requiring meticulous planning and a small army of quartermasters who could rival the best event planners of today. Before we get carried away with the romance of it all, let's remember the harsh realities. The ocean is no respecter of dreams or ambitions. It's a vast, indifferent expanse that can turn on you faster than a courtier with a grudge. The men on these ships faced storms that could swallow entire fleets, diseases that spread like rumors in the royal court, and the constant threat of piracy. Yet, what drove them onward was more than just the emperor's command. It was the promise of riches, adventure, and the chance to be part of something far greater than themselves. And then there were the political stakes. The voyages served as a bold statement to the world. China was open for business, and it intended to be the dominant player. Zheng's expeditions were a masterclass in soft power diplomacy, blending the allure of exotic gifts with the subtle reminder of military might. The fleet carried silks, porcelain, and other luxury goods, diplomatic tokens that spoke of China's wealth and sophistication. In return, Zheng was expected to secure tribute and allegiance from the rulers he encountered, adding another feather to the emperor's cap. Of course, the idea that these voyages were mere exercises in imperial vanity is a myth that needs debunking. Yes, exotic animals like giraffes and zebras did make their way back to China, much to the delight of the court. But these were more than just curiosities. They were symbols of the far-reaching connections China was forging. The giraffe, for instance, was seen as a killin, a mythical creature symbolizing peace and prosperity. So, while it's easy to picture Zheng He as an ancient zookeeper, the reality was far more strategic. Economically, the expeditions were a gamble, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Maintaining such a massive fleet wasn't cheap, and the Ming treasury had to be as deep as the ocean itself to fund these endeavors. Yet, the potential rewards were enticing. Trade routes established by Zheng, he opened new markets for Chinese goods, while the exchange of ideas and technology enriched the empire in ways that went beyond mere gold and silver. In essence, Zheng He's voyages were a paradox of power and diplomacy, a delicate dance on the high seas where the stakes were as vast as the ocean itself. And as the fleet cut through the waves, it carried with it not just men and cargo, but the hopes and ambitions of an empire eager to etch its name into the annals of history. It's worth noting that Zheng He himself was a unique figure in this grand narrative. As a Muslim and a eunuch, he was an outsider in many respects, yet he commanded respect and loyalty from those under his charge. His understanding of different cultures, perhaps rooted in his own diverse background, made him an astute diplomat and a capable leader. Zheng He wasn't just steering ships. He was navigating the complex tides of human ambition and geopolitical strategy. So, as our tale unfurls, keep in mind that these voyages were more than just grand adventures. They were calculated moves on a global chessboard. The waves beneath Zheng He's fleet carried more than just water. They bore the weight of a nation's dreams and the echoes of a future yet to be written. But don't pack up your sea legs just yet. There are more journeys to embark on and more myths to unravel as we continue to chart the course of China's great maritime explorer. Speaking of dreams and futures, let's dive into the complex web of cultural exchanges and economic impacts spun by Zheng He's voyages. We're not just dealing with a bunch of sailors in fancy boats. This is the grand opera of the early 15th century, with Zheng He conducting an orchestra of diplomacy, trade, and yes, a fair bit of not-so-subtle arm-twisting. The routes Zheng He carved across the Indian Ocean were more than just watery trails. They were the Silk Roads of the sea. Think of them as the ancient world's version of global e-commerce, minus the overnight shipping. These maritime highways connected the Middle Kingdom with far-flung lands like India, Arabia, and the Swahili coast of Africa. The treasure ships weren't just carrying silk and porcelain. They were the emissaries of culture, spreading ideas as well as goods. Let's talk economics for a minute. The treasure fleet's expeditions weren't funded by a mythical chest of gold. Nope, this was a calculated investment. The Ming Dynasty wasn't just tossing coins into the sea hoping for a financial mermaid to pop up. They were banking on trade networks that would bring back wealth in the form of spices, precious stones, and exotic woods. We're talking about a trade surplus that could make a modern economist giddy with excitement, or at least crack a smile. Now, trade wasn't the only thing these voyages were about. Zheng He was also spreading the gospel of Chinese supremacy. When his ships rocked up at foreign ports, they weren't just there to play nice. Diplomacy was often backed by the implicit threat of military might. It's the classic carrot and stick approach. Here's some silk, and oh, by the way, check out our massive fleet. It was a bit like showing up to a meeting with a beautifully wrapped gift in one hand and a very large stick in the other. But let's not sugarcoat it. These were not purely peaceful exchanges. Behind the silk curtains of diplomacy were power plays as intricate as the finest brocade. Zheng He's fleet was a floating fortress, and those 9-masted behemoths weren't just for show. They were a reminder that the Middle Kingdom had both the means and the will to enforce its interests. This was soft power with a hard edge, a masterclass in wielding influence without firing a shot, most of the time. One of the most compelling aspects of these voyages was the cultural exchange that took place. While the sailors were busy swapping silk for spices, they were also engaging in a less tangible trade, one of ideas, beliefs, and customs. The ports of the Indian Ocean were melting pots where Chinese, Arab, Indian, and African cultures collided and coalesced. It's a bit like a historical potluck dinner, where everyone brings a little something to the table, and the end result is a feast of cultural fusion. These interactions had profound impacts on the regions touched by the Ming fleet. In places like Calicut, on the Malabar coast of India, the presence of the Chinese fleet bolstered local economies and stimulated trade. Calicut became a bustling hub of commerce, where Chinese goods were exchanged for Indian spices, setting the stage for a thriving maritime economy. And let's not forget the cultural footprint left by these encounters. Chinese porcelain found its way into the homes of Indian and African elites, while Chinese navigational techniques and shipbuilding methods were adopted by local mariners. However, let's not romanticize this into some idyllic comeback moment of global harmony. The reality was far more complex. The voyages also reinforced existing power imbalances, with China often calling the shots. The tribute system was a clear indication of who was in charge. Local rulers were expected to pay homage to the Chinese emperor, a not-so-subtle reminder of the hierarchical nature of these relationships. It was diplomacy by design, with China positioning itself as the benevolent overlord of this new maritime order. But what about the man at the helm of this colossal enterprise? Zheng himself was a fascinating figure in this narrative of cultural exchange. As a Muslim eunuch, he brought a unique perspective to his encounters with foreign cultures. His background likely made him more empathetic to the diverse peoples he met, allowing him to engage with them on a deeper level. Yet, he was also a representative of Chinese imperial authority, a walking paradox who navigated the delicate balance between respect and dominance. Zhenghi's voyages remind us that history is never black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of shades, where ambition and altruism, peace and power, coexist in an ever-shifting dance. The romantic notion of peaceful exploration is tempting, but the reality is a tapestry woven with threads of both cooperation and coercion. The treasure fleet was a symbol of China's grandeur, but also of its ambition and willingness to assert itself on the global stage. As we continue to navigate the currents of Zhenghi's story, it's clear that these voyages were more than just epic adventures. They were a strategic chess move in a game of global influence, a testament to the power of maritime trade and cultural diplomacy. And while the waves may have carried the fleet's physical presence, the ripples of its impact spread far and wide, shaping the course of history in ways that still resonate today. So, as we chart the course of these legendary voyages, remember that the ocean is vast, and its depths are filled with both treasures and truths. Zhenghi's fleet was a beacon of China's ambition, a lighthouse guiding the way to a future where the Middle Kingdom stood at the forefront of global exchange. But don't pack away your curiosity just yet. There are more tales to tell, more myths to unravel, and more seas to explore as we delve deeper into the legacy of China's great maritime explorer. So, just when you thought the Ming Dynasty's maritime adventures were set to conquer the seas forever, reality decided to throw in a plot twist worthy of the most dramatic soap opera. After Zhenghi's grand finale on the high seas, the Ming court went through a change of heart more abrupt than a left swipe on a dating app. We're talking about a pivot so sharp it could give you whiplash. Picture this. After Zhenghi's seventh voyage in 1433, the treasure fleet returned to China like a rock band wrapping up its farewell tour. But instead of an encore, they got a bureaucratic cold shoulder. The Ming Dynasty had spent decades flexing its naval muscles, only to suddenly decide that looking inward was the new black. What gives? Enter the bean counters and paper pushers of the imperial court. The same folks who once cheered as Zhenghi set sail now had a different agenda. The Ming treasury had been bleeding silver like a punctured dinghy. Those massive treasure ships, they might as well have been made of gold, given the cost of keeping them afloat. Maintaining a fleet of that size wasn't exactly a bargain bin operation. The expenses were staggering. Equipping, manning, and maintaining these behemoths required a fortune, and not the kind you find in a fortune cookie. But money wasn't the only issue. The political landscape was shifting faster than sand dunes in a desert storm. The Yongle Emperor, Zhenghi's patron and maritime enthusiast, had long passed, leaving a power vacuum filled with officials who couldn't care less about the glory of the high seas. The new emperor, Zhu Zhanji, or the Xuan emperor, was a fan of fiscal prudence, and he wasn't alone. The Confucian scholars, who were about as fond of the treasure fleet as a cat is of a bath, argued that the resources could be better spent on defending China's northern borders and maintaining domestic stability. So, what do you get when you mix fiscal conservatism with a dash of bureaucratic infighting? You get the maritime equivalent of a garage sale. The Grand Fleet was left to rot in the docks, like forgotten relics of a bygone era. Ships that once carried the hopes and ambitions of an empire now served as oversized birdhouses. It was a classic case of out with the old, and in with the... well, not much of anything, really. The Ming court's decision wasn't just about tightening the purse strings. It was also about control. The voyages had empowered eunuchs like Zheng, and for Confucian officials, that was a hard pill to swallow. Eunuchs were seen as outsiders, and their influence in maritime affairs was a thorn in the side of traditionalists who preferred their power struggles to stay within the familiar confines of the imperial court. By grounding the fleet, these officials effectively clipped the wings of their political rivals. Let's not forget the economic factors at play here. The world was changing, and so were trade routes. By the mid-15th century, the allure of the maritime Silk Road had started to wane. Overland routes were regaining popularity, and the internal market was booming. China didn't need to send out a fleet to get its hands on exotic goods. Traders were bringing them right to China's doorstep. It was a bit like realizing you don't have to leave your couch to buy a pizza because, hey, delivery exists. The abrupt halt of the treasure fleet voyages also speaks volumes about the precarious nature of exploration. Zheng Odysseys were an exception, not the rule, in Chinese history. The Middle Kingdom had always been more about building walls than bridges, or, in this case, ships. The Great Wall wasn't just a tourist attraction in the making. It was a symbol of China's inward-looking stance. The fleet's demise was a return to form, a reversion to the mean, if you will. And yet, despite the practicalities and politics, there's something undeniably tragic about the end of Zheng's legacy. The treasure ships were more than just floating palaces. They were symbols of what China could achieve when it dared to dream big. But dreams, as it turns out, can be expensive. The Ming Dynasty's maritime ambitions were a testament to human endeavor, but they were also a cautionary tale about the limits of imperial reach and the perils of overextension. The cessation of these voyages left ripples in the water, echoes of a time when the horizon was not a boundary, but a beckoning call. Zheng's journeys demonstrated the power of exploration, trade, and diplomacy, but they also highlighted the fragility of such endeavors in the face of political and economic realities. The Ming court's decision to pull the plug on the treasure fleet wasn't just a financial decision. It was a reflection of a broader shift in priorities, a pivot from the open seas to the familiar shores of introspection. In the end, the once mighty treasure fleet became a ghost of its former self, a reminder of a time when China's dreams sailed on the waves. Zheng's story didn't end with a bang, but with a bureaucratic whimper, as the grand ships faded into obscurity, leaving behind a legacy that would take centuries to rekindle. Yet, even as the sails were furled for the last time, the echoes of those voyages continued to inspire. They were a testament to the audacity of vision, the courage to explore the unknown, and the ever-present tension between ambition and caution. As we stand at the edge of Zheng's story, contemplating the decline of Ming maritime power, it's essential to recognize that history is a series of choices, each as complex and multifaceted as the waves that once carried the treasure fleet. The story doesn't end here, though. The legacy of these voyages would resurface in unexpected ways, influencing future generations and reminding us of the timeless dance between exploration and constraint. So, hold onto your sea legs, because the tale of China's great maritime explorer is far from over. There's more to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more history to explore as we continue our journey through the annals of time. So, navigating the murky waters of history, it's crucial to understand that Zheng's story didn't end with the quiet rust of forgotten ships. His legacy, like an iceberg, has more lurking beneath the surface than what first meets the eye. But let's slice through the myths and legends with the precision of a seasoned shipwright saw. First up, myths. Zheng is often romanticized as a peaceful ambassador of Chinese culture, a maritime Santa Claus spreading silk and goodwill. In reality, his voyages were far from child's play. Sure, he handed out gifts, but this was no charity drive. The treasure fleet was a strategic masterpiece of diplomacy laced with the occasional whiff of gunpowder. While Zheng's ships ferried lavish gifts to distant rulers, they also carried cannons, the 15th century equivalent of reminding your neighbors you have a bigger stick. Let's talk about the economic ripple effects. Zheng's voyages opened up trade routes that were the lifelines of the global economy long before anyone thought of globalization. When his fleet reached Calicut, it wasn't just a colorful parade. It was a business meeting on a grand scale, where spices like pepper and cinnamon traded hands, enriching the Ming treasury with something more sustainable than just warm fuzzies. But here's the catch. While these routes were bustling with activity during Zheng He's time, they eventually faded into obscurity, just like his story. And that brings us to the vanishing act that is Zheng He's legacy. How could a figure of such monumental achievements become a historical footnote? Blame it on the bureaucratic bean counters and a shift in the tide of priorities. Post-1433, the Ming Dynasty pulled a cultural U-turn, focusing inward and letting Zheng He's accomplishments gather dust in the archives. China's maritime ambitions shrank faster than a wool sweater in a hot wash, and the stories of those grand voyages slipped into obscurity. Fast forward a few centuries, and China undergoes a renaissance of sorts during the late 20th century. Suddenly, Zheng He is no longer just a eunuch with a penchant for adventure. He's resurrected as a national hero, a symbol of China's past prowess, and a beacon for its future ambitions. The Chinese government, eager to rekindle national pride, dusted off Zheng He's chronicles and thrust him back into the spotlight, showcasing him as a pillar of maritime heritage. Zheng He became the poster boy for soft power, a testament to China's long-standing influence on global trade and diplomacy. Now, let's zoom out and chew on the bigger picture. Zheng He's life offers a treasure trove of lessons about ambition and the ever-shifting sands of politics. His rise from a captured boy to the commander of the largest fleet the world had ever seen is a testament to sheer willpower and political acumen. Yet, it also underscores the fleeting nature of fame. One minute you're on top of the world, or in Zheng He's case, the world's oceans, and the next, you're relegated to footnotes in dusty tomes until someone decides to blow the dust off your legacy. The political gymnastics of the Ming court, with its sudden pivot from maritime exploration to insular consolidation, remind us of the precarious balance between ambition and sustainability. The Ming Dynasty's decision to shelve its nautical aspirations was a pragmatic move, but it also snuffed out the golden era of Chinese maritime exploration. It's a narrative that repeats throughout history, greatness often curtailed by the pragmatic needs of the present. Zheng He's story also serves as a cautionary tale about the cost of ambition. His voyages were arguably ahead of their time, a bold vision of a globally interconnected world. Yet, the exorbitant expenses and political maneuverings remind us that ambition, unchecked, can lead to overreach. The Ming Dynasty's retreat into itself after Zheng He's final voyage is a stark reminder of how quickly priorities can shift, leaving grand dreams stranded on the shore. So, where does this leave us? Zheng He's legacy is a rich tapestry, woven with threads of ambition, power, and the inexorable march of time. His story might have been eclipsed for centuries, but its re-emergence offers a lens through which to view the complexities of human endeavor. It's a narrative that challenges us to consider the balance between reaching for the stars and keeping our feet firmly planted on the ground. Zheng He's voyages were more than just epic tales of adventure. They were a testament to the power of exploration and the delicate dance between ambition and reality. His legacy, now revived, continues to inspire, reminding us that history is not just a collection of past events, but a living dialogue between then and now. As we dark this conversation, let Zheng He's story linger like the salt of the sea breeze, a reminder that history is as much about the legacies we leave as it is about the journeys we take. And while the waves may have long since stilled, the ripples of Zheng He's voyages continue to shape the shores of time. Joséphine de Beauharnais entered the world on the lush island of Martinique, a place where the air was as thick as the sugarcane fields that dotted its landscape. Born in 1763 to a modestly wealthy family, by colonial standards, anyway, she grew up in a society that was as volatile as the Caribbean weather. Her childhood, though far from a tale of woe, was no stroll along a sandy beach. Her parents, Joseph Gaspard Tascher de la Pagerie and Rose Claire des Vergers de Sanois, owned a sugar plantation, but let's not glamorize it too much. This was the kind of wealth that depended heavily on the brutal labor of enslaved people, a grim reality that often gets glossed over when we're too busy swooning over her future Empress status. Fast forward to 1779, and Joséphine, then known as Marie-Joseph Rose Tascher de la Pagerie, was shipped off to France like a piece of fine porcelain to marry Alexander de Beauharnais. This alliance was more about financial salvation than romantic dreams, as her family was teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. Alexander, a viscount with a lineage more impressive than his bank account, wasn't exactly Prince Charming either. Their marriage was rocky enough to make soap opera writers green with envy. She was 16, he was 19, and their union quickly turned into a masterclass on how not to do relationships. It's a common misconception that Joséphine's life in France was all about attending balls and wearing lavish gowns. Sure, she had 2 children, Eugene and Hortense, who would later become significant players in the Napoleonic saga. But let's get real. Matrimonial bliss was not on the menu. Alexander was too busy gallivanting around Paris to be a doting husband, leaving Joséphine to fend for herself. Their marriage was a hot mess, leading to a separation that was about as amicable as a catfight. Then, the French Revolution came barreling through, turning everything upside down like a toddler in a toy store. Alexander, ever the political dabbler, found himself on the wrong side of the guillotine thanks to his noble birth and revolutionary aspirations. In 1794, he was executed, leaving Joséphine a widow at 31 with 2 kids and a mountain of debt. Talk about a plot twist worthy of a binge watch. But here's where Joséphine's story takes a fascinating turn. Instead of drowning in sorrow, she mastered the art of survival in a city where losing your head was more than just a figure of speech. With a mix of charm, wit, and a knack for networking that any LinkedIn user would envy, she maneuvered through the treacherous waters of post-revolutionary Paris. She wasn't just sitting in a corner waiting for life to happen. She was out there, mingling with the who's who of the new regime, showcasing her social acumen with the finesse of a skilled diplomat. The reality of her widowhood was far from a Victorian melodrama. Joséphine's financial situation was as precarious as a tightrope walker without a net. The guillotine might have claimed her husband, but it didn't touch the debts that piled up like a game of Tetris. And yet, she managed to maintain a lifestyle that suggested otherwise. It was a delicate balancing act of appearances, favor courting, and perhaps a little creative accounting. In this new Paris, where the aristocracy had been chopped down to size, Joséphine reinvented herself. She navigated through the remnants of the ancient regime with a savvy that makes modern influencers look like amateurs. Her connections, particularly with influential men, were more than just social calls. They were strategic alliances in a city where the political landscape shifted faster than the sands of time. Her residence became a hub for the movers and shakers of the day, which was no small feat for someone who'd been one step away from the chopping block herself. So, contrary to popular belief, Joséphine's rise wasn't about luck or destiny. It was about grit, charm, and a keen understanding of the power dynamics at play. In a world where survival often depended on the flick of a revolutionary's wrist, she emerged not just unscathed, but poised for her next role. It was this blend of resilience and adaptability that set the stage for her future as the consort of one of history's most famous figures. But that's a tale for another day. For now, let's just say that Joséphine de Beauharnais was making her way through the chaos of revolutionary France with the grace of a dancer and the cunning of a chess master. With Joséphine de Beauharnais gliding through revolutionary France with the grace of a dancer and the cunning of a chess master, it was only a matter of time before she collided with the man who would change her life. And let's be honest, the course of European history, into Napoleon Bonaparte, the Corsican upstart with more ambition than a reality TV contestant and a knack for military strategy that would make Sun Tzu nod in approval. Their meeting wasn't exactly the stuff of fairy tales, but then again, neither was the French Revolution. Picture this. It's 1795, and Paris is a hotbed of political intrigue and social jockeying. The city was still reeling from the reign of terror, and the Directory government was about as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Joséphine, with her impeccably honed social skills and a Rolodex full of influential contacts, had managed to secure a comfortable position in this chaotic landscape. Meanwhile, Napoleon was a rising military star, fresh from quelling the Vendémiaira rebellion and looking for ways to climb the social ladder. Their introduction was orchestrated by none other than Paul Barras, one of the directors of the new government, and a man who knew the value of a good match, both politically and personally. Napoleon, at 26, was already a general, and Joséphine, at 32, was an experienced socialite with an aura of sophistication that belied her precarious financial situation. The attraction was immediate, but let's not get too swept up in the romance. Napoleon was no wide-eyed lover. He saw in Joséphine a partner who could open doors in the elite circles he desperately wanted to enter. And Joséphine, she saw in Napoleon a ticket out of her financial woes and a chance to attach herself to a rising star. Their courtship was a whirlwind, full of passionate letters and grand promises. Napoleon's letters, gushy enough to make a Hallmark card blush, were filled with declarations of undying love and longing, written with the fervor of a man who was more accustomed to commanding armies than wooing women. He called her his adored Joséphine, a term of endearment that might have made his fellow officers roll their eyes, but it worked like a charm on Joséphine. She was swept off her feet, or at least she saw the advantages of appearing to be. In March 1796, they tied the knot in a civil ceremony that was as rushed as it was understated. Napoleon, ever the strategist, conveniently fibbed about his age on the marriage certificate, claiming to be 28 instead of 26, to narrow the age gap. Joséphine, on the other hand, shaved 4 years off her own age, a tradition of creative age stating that dates back to time immemorial. The ceremony was intimate, attended by a small group of friends and political allies, and it lacked the pomp and splendor one might expect for a future empress. But here's the kicker. Napoleon left for the Italian campaign just 2 days after the wedding, leaving Joséphine with a new title but the same old debts. Napoleon's Italian campaign was a smashing success, catapulting him to fame and fortune. He brought back not just military glory, but also the spoils of war, art, money, and influence. That would lay the foundation for his future empire. Joséphine, meanwhile, was left to manage their affairs in Paris, a task that required all her charm and cunning. She turned their home into a political salon, hosting soirees that attracted the cream of Parisian society. It was here that she wielded her influence, smoothing over Napoleon's rough edges with the grace of a diplomat and the skill of a seasoned operator. But let's not pretend it was all smooth sailing. Their marriage was as tumultuous as the times they lived in. While Napoleon was away conquering Europe, Joséphine was rumored to be entertaining admirers of her own, a reality Napoleon greeted with a mix of rage and resignation. His letters, once full of romantic fervor, took on a more accusatory tone, reflecting his suspicions and insecurities. Yet, despite the personal drama, they remained a formidable power couple, each using the other to further their own ambitions. On the political stage, Joséphine played her role to perfection. She was the charming hostess, the supportive wife, and the indispensable partner, all wrapped up in one elegant package. Her influence helped smooth Napoleon's path to power, lending him an air of legitimacy and sophistication that no battlefield victory could provide. She was the yin to his yang, the velvet glove to his iron fist. As Napoleon's star rose, so did Joséphine's. She became the ultimate insider, privy to the machinations and maneuverings of the political elite. Her presence at Napoleon's side lent him the credibility he craved, while her connections ensured that he was never short of allies or funds. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement, built on a foundation of ambition and necessity rather than fairy tale romance. Their story, one of power, passion, and politics, was far from over. As Napoleon's ambitions grew, so did the challenges they faced, both as a couple and as individuals. But for now, they were the toast of Paris, a symbol of the new order rising from the ashes of the old. It was a heady time, full of promise and potential, and Joséphine was determined to make the most of it. So, as we leave them on the cusp of greatness, remember this. In the grand game of history, Joséphine was no mere pawn. She was a queen in her own right, playing her hand with skill and finesse. The stakes were high, but for Joséphine, the rewards were worth every risk. And as we know, in love and war, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. Just as Joséphine had mastered the art of ascending society's slippery slope, she found herself perched at the pinnacle of power, Empress of the French. You see, when Napoleon crowned himself emperor in 1804. Yes, crowned himself, because why let the Pope have all the fun? He made Joséphine his empress. Let's not sugarcoat it, though their coronation at Notre Dame Cathedral was less about divine right and more of a masterclass in political theater. Napoleon was a showman after all, and Joséphine was his perfect co-star. Now, let's talk about court life, which was as extravagant as a rock star's tour bus, minus the guitars, but with a lot more chandeliers. The imperial court was a spectacle of grandeur, with Joséphine at its heart, orchestrating everything with a finesse that could make a maestro jealous. Her official residence, the Château de Malmaison, became the setting for lavish parties and political scheming alike. The palace itself was a symbol of their newfound status, acquired for 300,000 francs, a small fortune at the time. No detail was too small or expense too great in the pursuit of opulence. Silk draperies, gilded furniture, and enough silverware to outfit a small army were just the beginning. But here's the kicker. While Napoleon was busy conquering Europe, Joséphine was conquering the world of high fashion and interior design. She had a penchant for shopping that would put modern influencers to shame. Her wardrobe alone could have funded a minor military campaign. In 1806, her annual clothing allowance was reported to be 600,000 francs, a staggering sum that could make even the Kardashians do a double take. And it wasn't just about the clothes. She had a weakness for jewelry and art that was almost as legendary as her charm. Now, before you roll your eyes at the excess, let's dig into why this mattered. In a post-revolutionary France, where the guillotine had sliced through the old nobility like a hot knife through butter, appearances were everything. Joséphine understood this better than anyone. Her spending was not just about vanity, it was calculated. In a court where power was as fluid as silk, being the best-dressed woman in the room wasn't just a status symbol, it was a political tool. It allowed her to maintain influence over the court and keep Napoleon's often unruly generals and ministers in line. But let's not gloss over the economic implications here. While Joséphine was busy amassing a collection of gowns and gems, France's economy was feeling the strain. Napoleon's military campaigns were costly ventures, and the empire's coffers weren't exactly overflowing. The financial burden of maintaining such an extravagant court was like trying to keep a champagne tower from toppling. It was precarious at best. The disconnect between their lavish lifestyle and the economic realities facing the average French citizen was as glaring as a sunbeam in a dark room. And in the midst of all this opulence, Joséphine was also navigating the treacherous waters of court politics. Her position was never secure. She was constantly under scrutiny from those who viewed her as just another social climber. She had to contend with rivals, both real and imagined, who sought to undermine her influence. Her infamous spending habits didn't exactly win her friends among Napoleon's ministers, who fretted over the empire's spiraling debts. Despite the whispers and the jealous glances, Joséphine held her ground with a poise that would make even the most seasoned diplomat envious. She was a master of diplomacy, smoothing over conflicts with a kind word here, a strategic alliance there. She wielded her charm like a rapier, cutting through tensions with a smile and a well-placed compliment. Her ability to make allies out of enemies was as legendary as her taste in fashion. Of course, the fairy tale couldn't last forever. Napoleon's ambitions were as boundless as the skies, and his need for an heir became an elephant in the room that no amount of silk could cover. Despite their personal dramas and her best efforts, Joséphine had not borne him a child, a fact Napoleon couldn't ignore as he dreamed of founding a dynasty that would rival the Caesars. But as we leave Joséphine amidst the glittering chaos of the imperial court, poised on the brink of a future as uncertain as the stock market, let's remember this. She was a woman who played the hand she was dealt with dexterity and daring. Her life was a testament to the power of wit over wealth, charm over circumstance. And while the next chapter in her life would bring new challenges and heartaches, for now, she was the Empress of France, the Queen of Couture, and the heart of a court where appearances were the currency of power. Stay tuned, because in the world of Joséphine and Napoleon, the only constant was change, and the next act in their extraordinary saga promises to be as captivating as the last. As the glitter of the imperial court shimmered like a mirage, the reality looming on the horizon was far less golden. Behind the velvet curtains and beneath the layers of silk, a truth was unfolding that no amount of finery could disguise. The marriage of Joséphine and Napoleon was unraveling like a poorly sewn hem. You see, in the grand theater of empire building, Napoleon's dream of a dynasty required an heir, and despite Joséphine's many talents, producing an heir wasn't one of them. The year was 1809, and the empire was at its zenith, yet for Napoleon, the absence of a direct successor was a glaring hole in his otherwise impeccable plans. For a man who could bend maps and redraw borders with a flick of his pen, this was one conquest that eluded him. The question of succession wasn't just a personal matter, it was a political necessity. Without an heir, his grand empire was a house of cards, vulnerable to the winds of change. Let's not sugarcoat it. Napoleon's decision to divorce Joséphine wasn't about falling out of love or a sudden incompatibility in their Netflix tastes. It was a cold, calculated move that any chess master would appreciate. Divorce, though, wasn't just signing a couple of papers and moving on, especially when you're the Emperor of France. It was a political earthquake with aftershocks that would ripple through the corridors of power. In December 1809, the decision was announced. The divorce was presented as an act of state necessity, a noble sacrifice for the good of France. Imagine the scene, a solemn affair at the Tuileries Palace, with tears and declarations of undying respect. Joséphine, ever the actress, played her role with grace, although behind her composed facade, one can only imagine the turmoil. The couple that had once been the toast of Paris now stood as a testament to the ruthless demands of power. For Joséphine, the divorce was both an end and a beginning. Stripped of her title but not of her dignity, she retreated to Malmaison, her beloved estate, which Napoleon allowed her to keep. It was here, amidst her gardens and her cherished collections, that she sought solace. If the court was the stage, then Malmaison was her sanctuary. The estate, acquired for a staggering 300,000 francs, became a hub of culture and botany, a reflection of Joséphine's refined tastes and intellectual pursuits. Despite the personal upheaval, Joséphine's influence was far from extinguished. She had built a network of connections that even the most seasoned LinkedIn user would envy. Her relationships with European royalty, diplomats, and artists provided her with a social capital that no decree could annul. In the world of politics and power, Joséphine understood that relationships were the real currency, and she spent hers wisely. Post-divorce, Joséphine's life might not have had the sparkle of an empress's diadem, but it wasn't devoid of light either. Her passion for botany blossomed, quite literally, as she transformed Malmaison into a horticultural paradise. She introduced hundreds of plant species to France, including the now famous rose that bears her name. It was a legacy of beauty that outlives the transient nature of political power, a blooming testament to her enduring impact. Meanwhile, Napoleon was busy securing his future, which, in true Napoleonic fashion, meant a swift remarriage. Enter Marie-Louise of Austria, a Habsburg princess, and the great-niece of the infamous Marie Antoinette. Their marriage in 1810 was not a love match. Let's not kid ourselves, but a strategic alliance designed to cement Napoleon's legitimacy and secure that elusive heir. The marriage to Marie-Louise quickly bore fruit, with the birth of Napoleon Roman II, dubbed the King of Rome, in 1811. For Napoleon, it was a triumph. For Joséphine, a bittersweet reminder of what might have been. Yet, despite this new chapter in Napoleon's life, his relationship with Joséphine remained complex. He continued to write to her, confiding in her as a trusted friend and advisor. It was a testament to their enduring bond, a connection that transcended the legalities of divorce. Back at Malmaison, Joséphine's life was a study in resilience. She maintained her social calendar, hosting salons that attracted the intellectual and cultural elite. Her ability to navigate the post-divorce landscape with grace and aplomb was nothing short of remarkable. In a society that often reduced women to their marital status, Joséphine carved out a role for herself that defied convention. Her charm and charisma, honed over years of court diplomacy, remained her greatest assets. Even as Europe was engulfed in the chaos of Napoleonic wars, Joséphine's influence was a quiet but undeniable force. She was a living reminder that power and prestige were not solely the domain of emperors and generals. As Napoleon's empire began to crumble under the weight of overreach and hubris, Joséphine's world remained steadfast. Her gardens thrived, her friendships endured, and her legacy was secure. History often remembers the victors, the conquerors, and the kings, but Joséphine's story is a reminder that influence can be wielded with a softer touch. So, as we leave Joséphine in a garden of roses, let's not forget the lessons of her life. She was a woman who understood the art of the possible, who navigated the shifting sands of politics with grace and savvy. Her story is far from over, and as history marches on, her legacy will continue to bloom in ways both subtle and profound. Stay tuned, because in the world of Joséphine and Napoleon, the stakes are high, and the drama is far from finished. And so, as Joséphine tended to her roses, history continued its relentless march, unfazed by past glories or personal misfortunes. While Napoleon's empire crumbled like an overbaked soufflé, Joséphine's legacy was quietly solidifying, rooted more in her garden at Malmaison than in the grand halls of power she once graced. Her final years were a study in contrasts, a retreat from the public eye, yet a time when her influence was anything but dormant. Malmaison, that exquisite refuge, was more than just a retirement home for the erstwhile Empress. It was a living testament to her tastes and talents. She transformed it into a botanical paradise, importing rare species from around the globe. Her interest in botany was no idle pastime. It was a passion that required meticulous planning and a hefty purse. She spent a staggering 100,000 francs on her gardens, an investment that spoke to her enduring love for beauty and nature. Her roses, the variety she cultivated, became as legendary as the woman herself, a blooming legacy that outlasted the turbulent politics of her day. But let's cut through the romantic imagery of a serene Joséphine pruning her roses. Her life at Malmaison was not without its challenges. The shadow of Napoleon loomed large, his fortunes tied inexplicably to hers even after their separation. When he was exiled to Elba in 1814, Joséphine's health took a noticeable dip, as if the fall of her former husband weighed on her spirit. By May 1814, just days before Napoleon's first exile, she succumbed to pneumonia, a mundane ailment that claimed an extraordinary life. Her death was a punctuation mark, not a full stop. The world mourned her loss, with tributes flowing in from across Europe. Even Tsar Alexander I of Russia paid his respects, a nod to her enduring charm and diplomatic acumen. She was laid to rest at the Church of St. Pierre St. Paul in rural Malmaison, her final resting place a stone's throw from the gardens she adored. Now, let's tackle the myth versus reality of Joséphine's life, a narrative often as tangled as the vines in her garden. The romanticized version paints her as the archetypal Empress, a Cinderella figure who charmed her way from obscurity to the pinnacle of power. But the truth, as always, is more complex. Joséphine was no passive recipient of fate's favors. She was an active participant in her destiny, wielding her intelligence and charm like a maestro conducts an orchestra. Her legacy is often overshadowed by the colossal figure of Napoleon, yet she was a trailblazer in her own right. In an age when women were often relegated to the sidelines, Joséphine carved out a space for herself at the center of the action. Her influence was subtle but profound, shaping not just fashion and culture, but also the political landscape of her time. Let's debunk the notion that she was merely a spendthrift socialite. Sure, her penchant for luxury was legendary, and her spending habits could have bankrupted a small nation. But her extravagance was a tool, a way to project power and maintain her status in a volatile court. It was a calculated risk, not a frivolous indulgence. In a world where appearances were everything, Joséphine understood that the right gown could open doors that remained firmly shut to others. And then there's the question of her role in Napoleon's rise. Was she the power behind the throne, or merely a decorative addition to his imperial ambitions? The answer, like so much of history, is both and neither. Joséphine was a partner in the truest sense, complementing Napoleon's military prowess with her social intelligence. Her salons were not just gatherings of the Parisian elite. They were incubators of ideas and alliances that bolstered Napoleon's regime. Yet, for all her accomplishments, Joséphine's life was a constant balancing act. She navigated the treacherous waters of court politics with the skill of a seasoned diplomat, always aware that her position was as precarious as a tightrope walk. Her story is a testament to the power of adaptability, of the ability to reinvent oneself in the face of adversity. It is a narrative that resonates today, reminding us that influence can be wielded with subtlety as well as strength. As we reflect on Joséphine's life, let's not forget the lessons she offers about the roles of women in power during her time. She was a pioneer, not because she shattered glass ceilings, but because she navigated around them with grace and ingenuity. Her story challenges the notion that power is solely the domain of the overtly powerful. In many ways, Joséphine was the embodiment of soft power, using her charm and wit to achieve what brute force could not. Her legacy endures not just in the annals of history, but in the roses that bear her name, in the art and culture she championed, and in the countless women who followed her path, wielding influence in ways both grand and subtle. Joséphine's life is a reminder that history is not merely a series of events, but a tapestry woven from the lives of those who dared to defy convention and redefine their world. So, as we bid adieu to the tale of Empress Joséphine, let's carry forward the essence of her journey, a story of resilience, reinvention, and the enduring power of grace in a world often governed by might. And as you drift off to sleep, perhaps you'll find inspiration in the garden of history, where the roses of the past bloom eternal, whispering their secrets to those willing to listen. The Phoenicians were the underdog story of the ancient world. They were like that indie band that never quite headlined the big festivals, but had a cult following that knew they were something special. Nestled along the narrow strip of the eastern Mediterranean coast, modern-day Lebanon, for the geographically inclined, they inhabited a land that was more rocks and hills than fertile plains. Yet, here's the kicker. These so-called forgotten cousins of ancient civilizations became the maritime maestros of their time. We're talking about a civilization that thrived around 1500 BCE, when most folks were still trying to figure out the whole iron thing, and others were busy building pyramids for pharaohs. The Phoenicians, however, were cruising the high seas with swagger. They didn't have the luxury of sprawling lands like Egypt or Mesopotamia, but they did have a front row seat to the Mediterranean, and boy, did they make the most of it. The Phoenicians were like the startup founders of antiquity, except instead of developing apps, they were launching ships. Their homeland, think of it as a long, narrow strip hugging the coast, wasn't exactly ideal for agriculture. But what it lacked in farmland, it made up for with harbors. Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, these were their heavy hitters, the ports that became buzzing hubs of trade. It was a classic case of when life gives you lemons, build a fleet and start trading citrus. Their strategic location was pure gold, or more accurately pure purple dye, since that's what they famously traded. The prized Tyrian purple, extracted from the murex snail, was worth its weight in, well, purple. Roman emperors were draped in it, and wearing it was like walking around with a neon sign saying, "Look at me, I'm important." But this wasn't their only claim to fame. The Phoenicians also brought us the alphabet. Yes, the thing you're using to text your friends, or more aptly, to write complaints about historical inaccuracies in movies. So why aren't they household names today? Blame it on their talent for blending in. They were like the chameleons of the ancient world, adapting to whatever culture they encountered. The Greeks, the Assyrians, the Persians, they all had a turn at the helm of influence over Phoenician cities. But the Phoenicians, they just kept sailing, trading, and innovating, letting others take the spotlight. Phoenician society was a bit like a corporate conglomerate made up of autonomous city-states, each with its own king or council. This setup allowed them to be flexible, a bit like a multinational company with local branches. Byblos was known for its papyrus, Sidon for its glass, and Tyre for its dye. Each city had its specialty, and together they created a network that spanned the Mediterranean like a web spun by a particularly industrious spider. The Phoenician knack for seafaring was nothing short of legendary. These folks weren't just hugging the coast. They were venturing into open waters with the kind of audacity that would make a modern-day explorer blush. Their ships, with a design that was cutting-edge for the time, were built for speed and agility. They could carry up to 20 tons of cargo, everything from fine textiles to cedarwood, which was so precious it might as well have been listed on the commodities exchange of ancient times. But let's not romanticize their voyages as some idyllic Mediterranean cruise. These were risky endeavors. Pirates weren't just a Hollywood trope. They were a very real threat. And then there were storms, shipwrecks, and the occasional angry deity to contend with. Because why not add divine wrath to your list of travel concerns? The Phoenicians' mastery of trade routes also meant they were the ancient world's gossip network. They knew who was fighting whom, where grain was abundant, and what kind of goods would fetch the highest price in the markets of Egypt, Greece, or beyond. In a way, they were the first globalists, connecting disparate cultures through commerce long before the term ever existed. Their influence stretched far and wide, with colonies popping up as far afield as Carthage, which would later give Rome a run for its money in the Punic Wars. The Phoenicians weren't just trading goods, they were exporting culture, ideas, and perhaps most importantly, their alphabet. This nifty little invention of theirs was like the Rosetta Stone of linguistic evolution, simplifying the complex scripts of their neighbors into something more accessible. It's the kind of innovation that makes you wonder what else they might have come up with if they'd had more time in the limelight. The Phoenicians are often overshadowed by their more glamorous neighbors in history books, but maybe that's just because they were too busy getting things done to worry about legacy. They were the practical, no-nonsense traders who knew that, while empires rise and fall, commerce always sails on. So the next time you're sipping your morning coffee, spare a thought for the Phoenicians. After all, they might have had a hand in bringing the beans to your corner of the world. Ah, the Phoenicians and their knack for turning the Mediterranean into their personal aquatic highway. These ancient seafarers were the original navigators of globalization, charting trade routes that would rival any modern-day shipping giant. Their maritime empire stretched from the eastern Mediterranean all the way to the Atlantic, a feat that would have been Instagram-worthy if only they had social media. But alas, no selfies with Murex snails for them. Let's dive into these trade routes, shall we? The Phoenicians were like the GPS of the ancient world, minus the soothing voice that recalculates your route when you miss a turn. They had a mental map as good as any app, knowing every nook, cranny, and cove along the Mediterranean coastline. This wasn't just a casual Sunday sail. These routes were the arteries pumping economic lifeblood throughout the ancient world. Starting from their bustling cities, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, the Phoenicians would set sail westward, hugging the shores for most of the journey. Why the coastal preference? Simple. It minimized the risk of getting lost in the vast blue, or worse, becoming a snack for Poseidon's pet sea monster. From Cyprus to Crete, they made pit stops in places that would eventually become the postcard-perfect islands we dream of today. But back then, they were strategic trading posts. Think of them as the ancient world's version of duty-free shops. Their ships were laden with treasures. The famous Tyrian purple dye, cedar wood that was the ancient equivalent of hardwood flooring, glassware that would make any artisan proud, and metalwork that had a reputation sharper than the blades they sold. And let's not forget the papyrus from Byblos, a precursor to paper that fueled the spread of knowledge and presumably ancient gossip. But it wasn't just about peddling goods. The Phoenicians were keen on importing too. They brought back silver from Spain, tin from the British Isles, and ivory from Africa. These weren't just random acquisitions. Each item had a place in their economic jigsaw. Tin, for instance, was crucial for making bronze, a metal that was all the rage before iron muscled its way onto the scene. You could say the Phoenicians were the matchmakers of raw materials, pairing tin with copper and creating a love affair that produced the Bronze Age. Now, let's talk logistics. Sailing the Mediterranean was no small feat. We're talking about a time when navigating by stars wasn't just a romantic notion, but a survival skill. The Phoenicians had ships that were marvels of ancient engineering. These vessels, known as biremes, were powered by both sails and oars, allowing them to glide through waters with a grace that would put modern yachts to shame. They could carry up to 20 tons of cargo, which, back then, was akin to having a fleet of semi-trucks at your disposal. But don't romanticize this as a leisurely cruise. The Phoenicians faced storms that would have given any sailor nightmares, pirates who were less Johnny Depp and more cutthroat brigands, and geopolitical tensions that made the Mediterranean a hotbed of intrigue. Navigating these waters was like playing a high-stakes game of chess, with each move calculated to avoid conflict and maximize profit. And what about their forays into the Atlantic? Ah, now we're talking next-level exploration. The Phoenicians ventured through the Strait of Gibraltar, known to them as the Pillars of Hercules, into the Atlantic Ocean. a bold move that was as audacious as it was risky. Legend has it they reached as far as the British Isles, trading for tin in Cornwall. Whether that's entirely true or not is still up for debate, but the very fact that they dared to venture beyond the Mediterranean speaks volumes about their spirit of adventure. Their economic motivations were as clear as the waters they sailed. The Phoenicians weren't in it for the glory, they were in it for the goods. They understood that commerce was the key to power, a lesson that modern economists would agree with. By creating a commercial network that spanned continents, they effectively wrote the playbook on globalization long before the term even existed. But let's not get caught up in the romance of it all. The reality was far grittier. Their expeditions were taxing, fraught with danger at every turn, and success was never guaranteed. Yet these challenges only fueled their resolve. The Phoenicians were the ultimate pragmatists, adapting to whatever the ancient world threw at them with a resilience that was nothing short of inspiring. In essence, the Phoenicians were the unsung heroes of antiquity. While others built empires with armies, they did so with trade, proving that you don't need to conquer lands to wield influence. Their legacy, though faded with time, is etched in every corner of the ancient world they touched. So, as you navigate the complexities of your day, bear a thought for these ancient mariners. They may not have had onboard Wi-Fi, but they had something far more valuable: the courage to chart new courses when others stayed anchored in the past. And speaking of charting new courses, let's veer into the intricacies of Phoenician society, the real unsung machinery behind the sails. While modern tales might paint the Phoenicians as enigmatic sea lords with a monopoly on maritime trade, the truth is far more nuanced, and dare I say, political. In reality, they were more like savvy players in a game of ancient survivor, where alliances and strategy mattered more than brute strength. First up, let's talk about the stars of this Mediterranean drama, the city-states of Tyre and Sidon. These weren't your run-of-the-mill settlements. They were bustling hubs of commerce and governance. Think of them as the Silicon Valley of the ancient world, minus the tech, but brimming with innovation and economic clout. Each city-state was a self-governing entity, like a mini-country with its own king or ruling council. This autonomy was their secret sauce. It gave them the flexibility to adapt rapidly and seize opportunities as they sailed by. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Local politics in these city-states was less about Game of Thrones-esque power grabs and more about who could strike the best trade deals. Kings weren't just figureheads. They were the chief dealmakers, negotiating treaties and alliances that would put modern-day diplomats to shame. This wasn't a world of iron-fisted rule. It was more about who could charm the sandals off a potential trade partner. Take Tyre, for instance. Around the 10th century BCE, it was led by the legendary King Hiram I. This guy was the Jeff Bezos of his day, except his Amazon was a fleet of ships, and his deliveries were purple dye and cedarwood. Hiram's reign saw Tyre flourish through a shrewd alliance with King Solomon of Israel. In exchange for goods and skilled labor, Tyre received grain and olive oil, a mutually beneficial relationship that was the envy of the Mediterranean. It's a classic case of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, but with a lot more purple involved. Meanwhile, Sidon, Tyre's sibling rival, was busy carving out its niche in glass production. The Sidonians were the original influencers of the glass trade, and their products were the must-have items in ancient households. But here's a fun fact. They weren't just skilled artisans. They were also cunning negotiators. Sidon was known for its diplomatic prowess, maintaining neutrality in conflicts and establishing trade partnerships that allowed it to thrive even when the political seas got choppy. But don't be fooled into thinking all was rosy and peaceful. These city-states were like siblings at a family gathering, cooperative when necessary, competitive when convenient. They understood that while they were stronger together, each had to maintain its individuality to thrive. This delicate balance of cooperation and competition was the backbone of Phoenician success. Now, let's debunk a juicy myth, the idea that the Phoenicians had an ironclad monopoly on the seas. Sure, they were maritime maestros, but the seas were more crowded than a Mediterranean beach in August. The Greeks, the Egyptians, and later the Romans all had their ships in the water, vying for a piece of the trade pie. The Phoenicians' real genius lay not in monopolizing the seas, but in outsmarting their competition. Their intimate knowledge of the Mediterranean's nooks and crannies gave them an edge. allowing them to sail circles around less experienced mariners. Diplomacy was their secret weapon. They didn't just barter goods, they bartered peace and alliances. They were the ultimate networkers, forging relationships that kept their trade routes open and their ports bustling. This wasn't just about making a quick profit. It was about building a sustainable empire of commerce that could withstand the test of time and tides. And let's not forget about the social fabric that held this intricate tapestry together. The Phoenicians were a cosmopolitan bunch, with societies that embraced cultural diversity long before it became a corporate buzzword. Their cities were melting pots, with influences and people from across the ancient world mingling in the markets and shipyards. This diversity wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated and leveraged as a source of strength and innovation. The average Phoenician was likely multilingual, speaking a mix of Phoenician, Greek, Egyptian, and whatever dialects were needed to close a deal. In a world where communication was key, they were the polyglots of the ancient seas, fluent in the language of trade and diplomacy. So, as we sail through the political and social waters that buoyed Phoenician trade, let's appreciate the complexity and ingenuity that defined this ancient powerhouse. They weren't just merchants of goods, they were merchants of relationships, weaving a web of connections that spanned the Mediterranean and beyond. Theirs was a story of adaptability, diplomacy, and a relentless drive to explore the horizons of opportunity. Stay tuned as we continue this journey into the heart of Phoenician ingenuity, where the past echoes with lessons for the present. Now, let's hoist the sails and delve into the ingenious world of Phoenician technology, the secret sauce that kept them cruising at the top of their game. Spoiler alert, these folks were the Elon Musks of antiquity, minus the Twitter antics. Imagine crafting ships so advanced they could practically sail themselves, all while navigating treacherous waters with nothing more than the stars and some good old-fashioned grit. First off, let's talk shipbuilding. The Phoenicians weren't just slapping together planks and calling it a day. Oh no, they were the master shipwrights of the ancient world, crafting vessels that were the envy of every maritime power from Egypt to Greece. Their most famous creation, the Bireme. Picture it, a sleek, two-tiered rowing galley that was both fast and formidable, capable of carrying up to 20 tons of cargo. That's like fitting a small herd of elephants into a floating wooden bus. They used cedar wood from the mountains of Lebanon, trees so precious they were practically the Bitcoin of the Bronze Age. These ships were designed for speed and agility, crucial for both trade and dodging the occasional pirate with a misguided sense of entrepreneurship. The Phoenicians perfected the art of hull construction, using a morais and tenon technique that was as sturdy as it was sophisticated. Think of it like crafting a jigsaw puzzle where each piece fits so snugly that even Poseidon's temper tantrums couldn't tear them apart. They also pioneered the use of the keel, a central beam running the length of the ship, which provided stability and allowed for more daring voyages into open waters. But what good is a state-of-the-art ship if you don't know where you're going? Enter the Phoenicians' navigation skills, which were nothing short of legendary. These mariners were the original GPS, long before satellites and Siri became our travel companions. They relied on the night sky to guide their journeys, using constellations like Orion and the North Star as their celestial compass. This wasn't just an ancient version of stargazing. It was a survival skill honed over centuries of trial and error. The Phoenicians had a knack for reading the sea and weather patterns, knowing when to set sail and when to anchor. They could predict the changing moods of the Mediterranean like a seasoned meteorologist, ensuring their cargo reached its destination intact. And while modern navigators might scoff at this rudimentary system, it was a game changer that allowed the Phoenicians to chart routes that others wouldn't dare attempt. Now, let's address the elephant, or should I say, the alphabet in the room. The Phoenician alphabet was their ultimate legacy, a revolutionary system that transformed the way we communicate. Before they came along, writing was a convoluted mess of pictograms and hieroglyphs that required a PhD in ancient linguistics to decipher. Enter the Phoenicians, who simplified it all with a 22-letter alphabet that could be learned by anyone with a quill and a bit of patience. This wasn't just a tool for scribes. It was a democratization of knowledge, allowing ideas to spread faster than a viral TikTok. The alphabet was their secret weapon, a linguistic Trojan horse that infiltrated and influenced cultures across the Mediterranean and beyond. It was adopted by the Greeks, and eventually morphed into the Latin script we use today. So the next time you jot down a grocery list or scribble a love note, tip your hat to the Phoenicians for making it all possible. But let's not wax lyrical about their contributions without acknowledging the gritty realities of their world. The seas were a dangerous place, teeming with pirates who were less Jack Sparrow and more cutthroat opportunists. The Phoenicians had to be constantly on guard, their ships often armed to the teeth to fend off these marauders. It was a world where a wrong turn could lead you straight into hostile waters, or worse, into the clutches of a rival city-state eager to swipe your cargo. Their technological prowess wasn't just about staying ahead. It was about survival in a world where commerce was the lifeblood and competition was fierce. They were the original disruptors, continually innovating to protect their interests and expand their influence. And yet, for all their advancements, they remained pragmatic, understanding that technology was a means to an end, not an end in itself. The Phoenicians were a testament to the power of adaptability, a civilization that thrived by embracing change and seizing opportunities wherever they arose. Their innovations weren't just about building better ships or crafting a killer alphabet. They were about carving out a niche in a world that was as unpredictable as the seas they sailed. So as we continue this journey through the annals of Phoenician history, remember that their legacy isn't just etched in ancient stone, but in the very fabric of our modern world. They were the pioneers of the high seas, the architects of communication, and the unsung heroes of an era that laid the groundwork for the interconnected world we navigate today. Stay tuned as we set our sights on the final leg of this maritime odyssey, where the Phoenicians' enduring influence sails into the far reaches of history's horizon. So, with our sails set for the final stretch, let's dive into the lasting legacy of the Phoenicians, a people who, despite being more footnote than headline in most history books, laid the groundwork for the world as we know it. Their influence didn't just vanish like morning mist. Rather, it seeped into the cracks of history, quietly reshaping trade, culture, and communication. First, let's tackle the elephant in the Mediterranean, the decline of the Phoenician influence. The truth is, like a hit TV show that runs out of steam, the Phoenicians couldn't hold the spotlight forever. Their decline wasn't a dramatic collapse, but more a gradual fading into the background, as larger powers muscled in on their turf. By the time the Assyrians and Babylonians began their expansionist campaigns around the 9th century BCE, the Phoenician city-states were already feeling the pinch. These empires viewed the Phoenicians less as trading partners and more as tax-paying subjects. But it was the rise of the Persian Empire in the 6th century BCE that really put a damper on Phoenician independence. Under Persian rule, Phoenician cities were absorbed into a vast empire that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Indus Valley. While they retained some autonomy, it was a far cry from their days of maritime dominance. Imagine being the top player in a band, only to become a backup singer. That's the kind of demotion we're talking about. Despite these setbacks, the Phoenicians left a legacy that's more enduring than any empire. Their trade routes were the veins through which the ancient world's lifeblood flowed, connecting disparate cultures and economies. The networks they established laid the groundwork for future trade empires and global commerce. You could say they were the original architects of the interconnected world, a lesson in how trade can transcend borders and politics. Now, let's talk cultural impact. The Phoenicians didn't just trade goods, they traded ideas and innovations. Their alphabet, the precursor to modern scripts, was like the ancient version of open-source software, free to adapt and adopt. It spread like wildfire, taken up by the Greeks and then the Romans, eventually morphing into the alphabets we use today. Without this linguistic leap, who knows if Shakespeare would have penned his plays, or if you'd be texting your best friend right now. Their penchant for cultural exchange also meant that art, religion, and technology were shared across their network. The Phoenicians were the original cultural ambassadors, facilitating a cross-pollination that enriched civilizations from Egypt to Iberia. They were like the ancient influencers, but without the hashtags and sponsored posts. Their glass-making techniques, for instance, influenced artisans across the Mediterranean, while their religious practices mingled with those of the cultures they encountered. And then there's Carthage, the jewel in the Phoenician crown. Founded in the late 9th century BCE, it became a powerhouse in its own right, challenging Rome for control of the Mediterranean. The Punic Wars, those epic clashes between Rome and Carthage, were essentially a continuation of the Phoenician legacy. Though Carthage ultimately fell, its impact was felt long after, influencing Roman culture and politics. It's a classic case of the apprentice surpassing the master, though in this case, the master was long gone by the time the student took center stage. But let's not get too misty-eyed. The Phoenicians weren't saints. They were savvy traders who knew how to exploit an opportunity. Their success was built on a keen understanding of economics and a willingness to adapt. They were pragmatic to the core, understanding that in a world dominated by bigger players, survival meant being smarter, not stronger. This adaptability is perhaps their greatest lesson for us today, a testament to the power of innovation and resilience in the face of adversity. As we draw the sails on this journey, it's clear that the Phoenicians deserve more than a footnote in history. They were the unsung heroes of antiquity, the silent architects of a world that continues to be influenced by their innovations. Their story is a reminder that even the most unassuming players can leave a lasting mark, that influence doesn't always come from conquest, but from connection and creativity. In a world where empires rise and fall, the Phoenicians remind us of the enduring power of trade and cultural exchange. Their legacy is a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless drive to explore beyond the horizon. So, the next time you marvel at a glass sculpture or jot down a note, tip your hat to the Phoenicians. They may not have had the grand monuments of Egypt or the philosophical treatises of Greece, but their impact is etched into the very fabric of our everyday lives. And there you have it, the story of the Phoenicians, the maritime maestros who turned the Mediterranean into their playground and the world into their canvas. As we close this chapter, let's take a moment to appreciate the unsung heroes of history, whose quiet contributions continue to shape the world we navigate today. Whether you're setting sail on new adventures or anchoring in familiar waters, remember the Phoenicians and their enduring legacy, a testament to the power of innovation, adaptability, and the boundless human spirit. In the grand theater of history, where emperors often emerge from gilded palaces, Liu Bang's ascent to power is the equivalent of a peasant crashing a royal ball and walking away with the crown. We're talking about a guy who went from managing a small town to becoming the first emperor of the Han Dynasty in 202 BCE, all while probably still smelling of whatever the ancient Chinese equivalent of sweat and ambition was. Now, let's set the scene. The year is 221 BCE, and the Qin Dynasty, under the iron-fisted rule of Qin Shi Huang, is busy unifying China with all the subtlety of a bulldozer. They built the first version of the Great Wall and standardized weights and measures, which sounds great until you realize they were also mastering the art of tyranny. Fast forward to 210 BCE, and our friend Qin Shi Huang kicks the bucket, leading to a spectacular series of missteps by his successors. The Qin Dynasty collapsed faster than a house of cards in a windstorm, leaving a power vacuum so big you could probably fit the entire terracotta army inside. Enter Liu Bang, the ultimate underdog. Born in 256 BCE in a small village in present-day Jiangsu province, Liu Bang wasn't exactly your typical emperor material. He was a peasant, a commoner, and let's be honest, a bit of a rogue. But he had something that many of his contemporaries lacked: street smarts and a knack for reading the room, or in this case, the entire country. When the Qin fell apart, Liu Bang seized his chance. He joined the rebellion against the Qin, not as a high-ranking noble, but as a man who knew how to rally people to his cause. His charisma was his sword, and his pragmatism was his shield. Speaking of pragmatism, Liu Bang's policies were like a breath of fresh air in a room full of political hotheads. He wasn't about to go down the route of grand ideologies and lofty declarations. No, Liu Bang was more about keeping it real. He abolished the harsh legalism of the Qin, which, to be fair, was about as popular as a porcupine in a balloon factory. Instead, he focused on policies that made sense for the common folk, reducing taxes, easing labor burdens, and promoting Confucianism, which was like the ancient Chinese version of Oprah's book club. Everyone loved it. But let's not romanticize Liu Bang too much. He wasn't some benevolent saint in royal robes. He was a survivor in a cutthroat world, and sometimes that meant being as ruthless as the next guy. He had to deal with rival warlords, internal rebellions, and the ever-looming threat of the Xiongnu, the nomadic tribes who were basically the ancient Chinese boogermen. Yet, through a mix of diplomacy and sheer grit, Liu Bang managed to keep the Han Dynasty's ship steady amidst the turbulent seas of early Chinese politics. As the dust settled from the Qin's dramatic downfall, Liu Bang's Han Dynasty began to take shape, firmly planting its roots in the fertile soil of China's heartland. It wasn't just about holding power. It was about transforming the chaos into order, an order that would last over 4 centuries. The Han Dynasty became the template for future Chinese empires, a golden age where culture, technology, and economy flourished. And it all started with one peasant who dared to dream and scheme his way to the top. In essence, Liu Bang's story is a reminder that history is often a tale of unlikely heroes. It's not always about who has the most power at the start, who can adapt, outsmart, and outlast the chaos. The Han Dynasty's rise was as much about seizing opportunities as it was about creating them, and Liu Bang, with his pragmatic policies and common-sense governance, was the man of the hour. So the next time you hear someone say, "You can't change the world," remember Liu Bang, the peasant who did. And speaking of dreams that were as big as China itself, let's talk about the economic juggernaut that was the Han Dynasty. If you think today's governments have a monopoly on interference, think again. The Han Dynasty practically wrote the playbook on economic control, and they did it with 2 essential commodities, salt and iron. Now, before you roll your eyes, remember that in ancient times, these weren't just any old resources. Salt was the ancient equivalent of a refrigerator, preserving food long before anyone thought to slap a compressor on it. Iron, meanwhile, is essential for weapons and tools, basically the stuff that kept civilizations from collapsing into chaos. The Han government, with an eye for strategic resources, decided that these were far too important to leave in the hands of private enterprises. So, they slapped a big property of the state sticker on them. This wasn't just your average government overreach. It was a calculated move to consolidate power. Think of it as the Han Dynasty's version of a nationalization spree, but without the messy Twitter debates. The state monopolies on salt and iron generated substantial revenue, helping to fund everything from military campaigns to public works. You could say they were the ancient world's answer to the modern tax system, only with fewer loopholes and more spears. But it wasn't all sunshine and imperial profits. These monopolies faced their share of criticism, particularly from scholars who argued that they stifled economic freedom and innovation. The philosophical heavyweights of the time, particularly those influenced by Confucian ideals, grumbled that the monopolies went against the grain of moral governance. They saw it as a classic case of government overreach, a bit like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Yet, despite the grumbling, the system worked. The state coffers swelled, and the empire thrived, proving once again that when it comes to profit, ideology often takes a backseat. Now, if we're talking about trade and economy, we can't skip over the Silk Road, the OG trade route that connected East and West long before global trade was a thing. Picture the Silk Road not as a single highway, but as a sprawling network of routes stretching over 4,000 miles, from the Han capital of Chang'an, modern Xi'an, all the way to the bustling bazaars of the Roman Empire. This wasn't just a road, it was the internet of its day, but with more camels and fewer cat videos. The Silk Road's allure was undeniable. Exotic goods flowed in both directions: silk, spices, precious metals. It was the kind of trade that could make a merchant's eyes pop like a cartoon character's. Yet, while the romantic image is all about silk-draped caravans shimmering in the desert sun, the reality was often more gritty than glamorous. Traders faced bandits, brutal weather, and the ever-present risk of getting lost in the vastness of Central Asia. It was less Arabian Nights and more Mad Max meets Marco Polo. Despite these challenges, the Silk Road was a jackpot for those who could navigate its perils. For the Han, it wasn't just about the goods. It was a strategic conduit for cultural exchange and diplomacy. Ideas, religions, and technologies traveled alongside the goods, enriching the empire's tapestry. Buddhism, for instance, hitchhiked its way into China thanks to these routes, planting seeds that would later blossom into one of the country's major religions. The Silk Road was a highway of influence, stretching the Han's soft power far beyond their borders. But let's not forget the real backbone of the Han economic machine: agriculture. While emperors and merchants made the headlines, it was the peasants who kept the empire's heart beating. Their work transformed the fertile plains of the Yellow River Basin into a breadbasket that fed millions. The Han Dynasty embraced agricultural innovation with open arms, implementing iron tools and advanced plowing techniques that boosted productivity. They even developed a crop rotation system, ensuring that fields weren't just endlessly exhausted like a hamster on a wheel. Peasants were the unsung heroes, the silent majority who, through sheer grit and back-breaking labor, sustained an empire. Yet their lives were far from idyllic. Taxes were a constant burden, and natural disasters could turn a good harvest into a bad memory faster than you could say locust swarm. The government's demands were relentless, requiring not just taxes, but also labor for public works. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of jury duty, but with way more sweating involved. So there you have it, the Han Dynasty's economic landscape, a blend of state control, global trade, and peasant perseverance. It was a world where monopolies funded monuments, trade routes bridged continents, and agriculture underpinned everything. And while it might sound like the stuff of textbooks, it was anything but boring. The Han economic machine was a complex, dynamic beast, driven by human ambition and ingenuity, as well as power and pragmatism. As we venture deeper into the Han story, remember that empires aren't just built on battles and borders. They're forged in the fields, markets, and minds of those daring enough to dream big. But the Han Dynasty wasn't just about plowing fields and hoarding silk. It was also the Silicon Valley of ancient China, buzzing with cultural and intellectual innovation that would make even the most jaded tech bro raise an eyebrow. Picture this, a society not only obsessed with economic dominance, but also with the pursuit of knowledge, like a nerdy kid who's great at sports too. The Han period was a golden age for culture and intellect, a time when scholars weren't just dusty bookworms, but influential power players. Let's kick things off with Confucianism, the philosophical superstar of the Han. If you think Confucianism was just about quoting fortune cookies, think again. This was a full-blown intellectual movement that defined the era's moral compass. Confucian texts were compiled, studied, and revered like they were the ultimate self-help guides. The 5 classics, think of them as the Harry Potter series of ancient China, covered everything from history to poetry to ritual. They were the foundation of the civil service exams, the SATs of the Han Dynasty, if you will, except with fewer multiple-choice questions and more existential angst. Confucius himself, long dead by the Han period, was like the rock star who never aged, his teachings the eternal hits everyone wanted to play. The scholars who followed him were seen as the guardians of moral and ethical order, the Jedi Council of their time. But let's not sugarcoat it. These scholars had their own agendas. They weren't just pondering the universe from ivory towers. They were knee-deep in government affairs, shaping policies and currying favor with emperors. Idealized as paragons of virtue, many were adept political operators, more Machiavelli than Monk. Meanwhile, over in the realm of science and technology, the Han were making strides that would make even modern audiences gasp. Take paper-making, for example. Kai Lan, a court eunuch in 105 CE, is credited with perfecting the process. Before his breakthrough, writing surfaces were as clunky as a 90s desktop computer, cumbersome bamboo strips or silk, which was as expensive as a night out in Vegas. Kai Lun's innovation made writing materials cheaper and more accessible, democratizing knowledge like the Gutenberg press would do centuries later. It was a game changer, transforming how information was recorded and shared. Then there's astronomy, where Han scholars were literally reaching for the stars. They devised the armillary sphere, a model of the heavens that would make any backyard astronomer drool. These devices were like celestial Rubik's cubes, helping them track the movements of stars and planets with impressive accuracy. And let's not forget their star maps, which were more detailed than a Google Earth satellite view. These advancements weren't just for show. They were vital for agriculture, as the calendar was the farmer's best friend. Correctly predicting the seasons meant the difference between a bumper crop and a famine. But it wasn't all star charts and paper sheets. The Han also made significant contributions to medicine, developing theories and practices that would form the backbone of traditional Chinese medicine. The Yellow Emperor's Classic of Medicine, compiled during this time, is still revered today. It was a time when acupuncture and herbal remedies were being formalized, when doctors were seen more as wise sages than the stuffy, pill-pushing types of later eras. Yet, let's not romanticize it too much. Medical practices were still pretty hit or miss, and a bad diagnosis could be as dangerous as a sharp sword. As for the arts, the Han Dynasty was like a renaissance before the Renaissance. Sculpture, painting, and literature flourished, each infused with a unique blend of realism and symbolism. The tomb sculptures of the era, for example, were intricate and lifelike, capturing everything from fierce warriors to gentle animals. These weren't just decorative. They were believed to offer protection and companionship in the afterlife, a sort of celestial insurance policy. Poetry was another cultural mainstay, the ancient equivalent of social media posts, except with more depth and fewer cat memes. Poets like Sima Zheng wrote verses that resonated with both heartbreak and political satire, proving that the pen really was mightier than the sword. These works weren't just for entertainment. They were a form of subtle resistance, a way to critique the powers that be without losing one's head, literally. Yet, while the Han Dynasty was a beacon of culture and intellect, it wasn't without its shadows. The scholars and intellectuals, for all their wisdom, were often embroiled in political intrigue. Their idealized image as noble truth-seekers belied the reality of factionalism and corruption. Court politics could be as cutthroat as any battlefield, and navigating it required as much cunning as any military campaign. It was a world where the pen could indeed be mightier than the sword, but only if wielded with precision and care. And let's not forget the impact on the average Han citizen, for whom these intellectual pursuits were often distant echoes. While scholars debated philosophy and mapped the stars, most people were more concerned with immediate realities, like putting food on the table or dealing with the latest tax edict. The gap between the elite and the common folk was as wide as the Yellow River, and it was bridged not with understanding, but with the hard currency of taxes and labor. The achievements of the Han era, while impressive, were often built on the backs of those who would never reap their benefits. In essence, the Han Dynasty was a study in contrasts, a time of great progress and great disparity. Its scholars were both sages and schemers, its innovations both practical and profound. The era's cultural and intellectual achievements laid the groundwork for centuries to come, influencing not just China, but the world. But as we celebrate these milestones, let's remember the reality behind the romance. The human element, with all its flaws and ambitions, is what truly shaped history. And as always, the story isn't over yet. There are more layers to peel back, more myths to debunk, and more truths to uncover as we continue to explore this remarkable chapter in history. And speaking of peeling back layers, let's dive into the messier chapters of Han history, where ambition meets adversity, and not everyone walks away with their head still attached. You see, the Han Dynasty, while basking in its golden glow, also had to grapple with a laundry list of challenges that would make even the most seasoned bureaucrat reach for the nearest bottle of ancient Chinese wine. First up, let's talk about the Xiongnu. These folks were the thorn in the Han side, not the kind you can ignore, but the kind that demands constant attention, like a toddler with a sugar high. The Xiongnu were a confederation of nomadic tribes, roaming the steppes of Central Asia, north of Han territory. If you're picturing them as some sort of ancient biker gang, you're not too far off. They were mobile, fierce, and had a knack for hitting the Han where it hurt, raiding and pillaging the northern frontier with alarming regularity. The Han's relationship with the Xiongnu was, to put it mildly, complicated. At times they tried appeasement, sending gifts and brides in a practice charmingly known as heckin, or peace through marriage. Imagine sending your daughter off to marry the leader of a group that's just ransacked your border towns. Talk about awkward family get-togethers. But when diplomacy faltered, the Han didn't hesitate to flex their military muscles. They launched several campaigns to push back the Xiongnu, costing thousands of lives and an eye-watering amount of resources. Enter Emperor Wu of Han, or Wu the Warrior, as I like to call him. His reign from 141 to 87 BCE was the zenith of Han military might, a time when the empire expanded its borders like a teenager expanding their social media presence. Emperor Wu wasn't just content to sit on his laurels. He had grand visions of an empire stretching far and wide, and he wasn't afraid to use force to get there. Under his command, the Han launched a series of military campaigns that would make a Game of Thrones battle scene look like a friendly skirmish. Emperor Wu's expansionist policies stretched the Han borders to unprecedented extents, reaching into modern-day Korea, Vietnam, and Central Asia. But as any empire builder will tell you, conquering is the easy part. Keeping it is the real challenge. The cost of these campaigns was staggering, both in terms of lives and treasury. The price tag of maintaining such a massive military presence was like trying to keep a luxury yacht afloat with a leaky budget. And if you think the external threats were bad, wait until you hear about the internal drama. The Han bureaucracy was a behemoth, a sprawling network of officials that was as efficient as a sloth on a caffeine crash. Bureaucratic corruption was rampant, with officials more interested in lining their pockets than serving the emperor. It was like a game of whack-a-mole, with graft and bribery popping up faster than you could say imperial audit. The empire's tax system also didn't help. It was a patchwork of levies and duties that would leave even the most seasoned accountants scratching their head. For the average peasant, this meant more taxes than you could shake a stick at, leading to widespread discontent and occasional uprisings. It was a classic case of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, a tale as old as time, or at least as old as recorded history. But Emperor Wu wasn't just about expansion and bureaucracy. He was also a man of culture and intellect. He established the Imperial University, which trained future bureaucrats in Confucian classics, ensuring that the government was staffed not just with pencil pushers, but with scholars who could quote Confucius in their sleep. It was a move that solidified Confucianism's place at the heart of Han governance, turning it into the state ideology. So, while he was out conquering territories, he was also conquering minds. Yet, for all his achievements, Emperor Wu's reign was also a period of immense strain on the empire. The burden of maintaining such a vast territory was like juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle. It required constant vigilance, resources, and a level of coordination that would make NASA proud. The sheer size of the empire made communications slow and inefficient, with decrees taking weeks, if not months, to reach distant provinces. It was an age where the empire's reach often exceeded its grasp, where the dream of a unified China was constantly threatened by the reality of its own unwieldy size. As we unravel the complexities of the Han Dynasty, it's clear that its story is not just one of triumph and innovation, but also of struggle and vulnerability. The Han were masters of adaptation, navigating a world of shifting alliances, relentless enemies, and internal decay. Their legacy is a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of those who dared to dream big, even when the odds were stacked against them. But remember, this tale is just warming up. The Han Dynasty's saga is far from over, and as we delve deeper, we'll uncover more layers of intrigue, power, and human ambition. So buckle up, history buffs, because the next chapter promises even more twists and turns as we continue to explore this epic period in China's past. The Han Dynasty's saga is far from over, and as we delve deeper, we'll uncover more layers of intrigue, power, and human ambition. So buckle up, history buffs, because the next chapter promises even more twists and turns as we continue to explore this epic period in China's past. But every great dynasty eventually faces its reckoning, and for the Han, the cracks in the imperial facade began to show long before the final curtain fell in 220 CE. Let's start with the natural disasters that seem to have it out for the Han Dynasty like some cosmic vendetta. We're talking about a series of unfortunate events that would make Lemony Snicket look like a light read. Floods and droughts hit the empire with the regularity of a bad penny, turning fertile lands into either deluged wastelands or parched dust bowls. The Yellow River, that capricious serpent of water, was a particular troublemaker, flooding so often it earned the nickname China's Sorrow. By the time the Han were done with it, they probably wanted to rename it China's Absolute Nightmare. These natural calamities weren't just minor inconveniences, they were full-blown crises. They decimated crops, leading to famines that would have made even the most stoic peasant weep into their meager rice bowl. When the belly grumbles, the mind starts to question, and the Han court couldn't ignore the rumblings of discontent that echoed across the lands. A starving population isn't just hungry for food, they're hungry for change, and the Han emperors were beginning to feel the heat. As if Mother Nature's wrath wasn't enough, internal strife was brewing like a pot of particularly bitter tea. The later Han emperors, some of whom were more interested in palace intrigues than public welfare, failed to address the growing disparities within their realm. The gap between the ruling elite and the common folk was widening faster than you could say. Social inequality, creating a breeding ground for unrest. Enter the Yellow Turban Rebellion in 184 CE, a peasant uprising that wasn't just a footnote in history, but a full-blown revolution. Led by Zheng, a charismatic figure who combined religious fervor with political savvy, the Yellow Turban Rebellion drew its name from the headgear worn by its followers. They rallied under banners promising a new era, a great peace, and their numbers swelled like the tide, reaching hundreds of thousands at their peak. The Han response was predictably heavy-handed, but suppressing a rebellion of this scale was like trying to swat a swarm of locusts with a fly swatter. The rebellion was eventually quashed, but not without leaving deep scars. It weakened the central authority and emboldened local warlords, who saw an opportunity to carve out their own fiefdoms. The Han's control over their territories became as tenuous as a juggler balancing on a unicycle, and the political landscape turned into a Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, but with all the backstabbing. This period of upheaval was marked by a revolving door of puppet emperors and power-hungry regents. The imperial court, once the epicenter of Confucian ideals and scholarly debate, had become a cesspool of corruption and intrigue. Eunuchs, those once trusted palace servants, became kingmakers in their own right, wielding influence that rivaled that of the highest officials. It was a bit like letting the fox guard the henhouse, and the results were predictably messy. The final nail in the Han coffin came in the form of internal decay that had been festering for decades. The empire's vast bureaucracy, once a testament to its organizational prowess, became bloated and inefficient, a lumbering giant that couldn't react swiftly to the challenges at hand. Regional warlords, realizing the emperor's weakness, seized power in their territories, turning the Han lands into a patchwork of competing factions. By the time the last Han emperor, a hapless figure named Zheng, was on the throne, the dynasty was a shadow of its former self. In 220 C, he was forced to abdicate in favor of Cao Pai, the son of the powerful warlord Cao Cao, officially ending over 4 centuries of Han rule. The dynasty fell not with a bang, but with a whimper, its legacy left to the mercy of the turbulent Three Kingdoms period that followed. So, what do we make of the Han dynasty's fall from grace? It's a cautionary tale, one that echoes across the annals of history, a reminder that even the mightiest empires are vulnerable to the forces of nature and the flaws of human ambition. The Han story is a tapestry woven with threads of innovation and decay, of cultural brilliance and political folly. Yet, for all its tumultuous end, the Han dynasty's legacy endures. It laid the foundation for China's cultural and political identity, a template that countless future dynasties would emulate. The term Han itself became synonymous with the Chinese people, a testament to the dynasty's enduring influence. The innovations and philosophies nurtured during this golden age continued to shape China long after the last Han emperor had been shuffled off the stage. As we reflect on the Han's rise and fall, we're reminded that history isn't just a series of dates and events. It's a mirror reflecting the complexities of human nature. The Han dynasty teaches us that the seeds of greatness and decline often grow from the same soil, nurtured by ambition, circumstance, and the eternal dance between order and chaos. So, the next time you gaze upon the vast expanse of Chinese history, remember the Han dynasty, not just for its triumphs or its tragedies, but for the rich tapestry of human experience it represents. It's a saga that reminds us that while empires may rise and fall, the stories they leave behind are eternal. In the swirling vortex of Japan's late 20th century economic and technological whirlwind, one figure stood out like a serene eye of the storm: Emperor Akihito. Born in 1933, Akihito wasn't just any emperor. He was the 125th in a line that seemed to stretch back to when dinosaurs roamed the earth. Okay, not quite, but his ancestry supposedly goes back over a millennium. Talk about legacy pressure. Akihito ascended to the chrysanthemum throne in 1989, a time when Japan was riding high on an economic bubble that made Wall Street look like a lemonade stand. Now, let's backtrack a bit to 1959, a year that marked a royal shake-up that would make even the British tabloids blush. Akihito did something no emperor had done before. He married a commoner. Enter Michiko Shoda, the daughter of a flower company president, into a world of silk and ceremony. It was a love story that had the Japanese media in a tizzy, resembling a royal reality TV show long before such things plagued our screens. The press dubbed it the Cinderella marriage, sparking a frenzy that would make today's paparazzi seem like casual onlookers. The wedding itself was a spectacle, broadcast to an audience of over 15 million people, the kind of viewership that modern streaming platforms would kill for. But this was no fairy tale without its critics. Traditionalists balked at the idea of a commoner sitting on the imperial throne. It was, in their eyes, as scandalous as serving instant ramen at a five-star sushi restaurant. However, for many, it was a breath of fresh, commoner air in the musty corridors of imperial tradition. Fast forward to 1989, when a 56-year-old Akihito found himself at the helm of a nation that was an economic juggernaut. Japan was leading the charge in electronics, cars, and pretty much anything with a circuit board. The country's GDP was skyrocketing, and Japanese corporations were buying up American landmarks like kids in a candy store. Remember when Mitsubishi bought Rockefeller Center in 1989? Yeah, that happened. That year, Japan's economy was worth a staggering $3 trillion. People talked about the Japanese miracle as if it were the second coming. Yet, this prosperity came with its own quirks and challenges. The cost of living in Tokyo was soaring, with real estate prices so high that a small apartment cost the equivalent of a mansion in most other countries. It was a time when a square meter of land in Tokyo's Ginza district could match the price of an entire block in Manhattan. With such economic highs came the inevitable lows. For now, Japan was floating on a cloud made of yen. Akihito's reign was marked by a commitment to peace and reconciliation, a nod to the tumultuous years that preceded him. He was the first emperor to travel abroad extensively, using his role as a soft power diplomat to mend bridges and build new ones. His visits to sites of past conflicts, such as Pearl Harbor and China, were gestures of reconciliation that carried significant weight. He wasn't just a figurehead trapped in a palace. He was a global statesman in ceremonial robes. Despite the grandeur of his title, Akihito and Michiko represented a more modern, relatable imperial family. They were seen playing tennis together, a sport they both loved, and were often photographed in moments of casual affection, scandalously normal for an imperial couple. Their approachable image was a stark contrast to the rigid formality of their predecessors, and it resonated with a public eager for change. In a world where emperors were expected to be as inscrutable as a Zen koan, Akihito was refreshingly human. He was a keen researcher of marine biology, for crying out loud, with a particular fondness for goby fish. Yes, the Emperor of Japan had a soft spot for tiny, unassuming fish. Imagine the headlines if that were today. Emperor obsessed with fish, renames throne Gobi Kingdom. As we delve into Akihito's reign, let's strip away the myths and see the man behind the monarchy. His ascent to the throne came at a pivotal moment for Japan, a country straddling the line between ancient tradition and high-tech modernity. Akihito was an emperor for the new Japan, one that wasn't afraid to step into the global spotlight, even if it meant sharing it with a commoner bride and a nation of tech-hungry citizens. This was no ordinary emperor. This was Akihito, man who surfed the wave of change with the grace of a seasoned statesman and the curiosity of a marine biologist. Akihito was the kind of emperor who could swap royal robes for rubber boots without missing a beat. When natural disasters hit Japan, like the 1995 Kobe earthquake that left over 400 people dead, there he was, navigating debris-strewn streets to meet survivors, not as a distant figurehead, but as a compassionate leader. Wearing those work boots, he wasn't just trying to look the part. He was living it, embodying a hands-on approach that was as rare as a quiet subway train in Tokyo. These visits weren't just photo ops. They were moments of genuine empathy that endeared him to the Japanese public. The imperial family's transformation into a relatable institution was not by accident, but by design. Akihito knew the power of perception and worked tirelessly to modernize the imperial image. It wasn't all about striding through disaster zones, either. Akihito was keen on practicing his English, often engaging in impromptu conversations with international students. Imagine the pressure. You're sipping coffee in a Tokyo cafe, and the emperor himself sidles up to chat about the weather. His efforts to connect with the global community were more than symbolic. They were a bridge between Japan's insular past and its interconnected future. But let's not get too starry-eyed here. Akihito's reign wasn't all smooth sailing on the Sea of Japan. The shadow of World War II loomed large, and the emperor often found himself walking a diplomatic tightrope. Japan's wartime actions left deep scars, and navigating these historical issues required the finesse of a ninja, minus the shurikens. Akihito took it upon himself to issue apologies that were both sincere and strategically phrased, like a master chef balancing the flavors of a delicate dish. In 1992, during a historic visit to China, he expressed deep sorrow for the suffering caused by Japanese actions during the war, a statement as loaded as a sumo wrestler's lunchbox. His diplomatic gestures were crucial in a world where historical grievances could erupt faster than Mount Fuji's last major eruption in 1707. Akihito's approach was a modern take on the art of apology, acknowledging past wrongs while steering Japan towards a future of peace. And talk about a busy itinerary. His foreign trips often resembled a global game of Where's Waldo, with Akihito popping up everywhere from Southeast Asia to Europe, spreading goodwill like a seasoned diplomat in ceremonial garb. It's worth noting that these trips were not just about shaking hands and posing for the cameras. Each visit carried the weight of history, and Akihito embraced the role of a peacemaker with the seriousness it deserved. In 1994, during a visit to the United States, he laid a wreath at the National World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C., a poignant act that spoke volumes about reconciliation. His travels were packed with such symbolic gestures, each one a stepping stone towards mending Japan's fractured relationships. Yet, amid the grandeur of state visits and historical reckonings, Akihito remained grounded. He was never one to bask in the limelight. Rather, he used it to reflect the values he cherished. The emperor's dedication to peace and reconciliation was not just a political strategy, it was a deeply personal mission. After all, this was a man who had seen his country rise from the ashes of war to become an economic powerhouse, and he understood the delicate balance between past and present. Akihito's reign was a testament to the power of soft diplomacy, a lesson in how to wield influence without flexing muscle. In a world increasingly dominated by hard power, his approach was a breath of fresh air, like a gentle breeze on a humid Tokyo afternoon. His legacy as a modernizer and a peacemaker is a testament to his unique blend of humility and resolve. As we continue to explore Akihito's reign, let's remember that this was no ordinary emperor. He was a man who walked the line between tradition and modernity, between history and progress, with the grace of a skilled tightrope walker. And in doing so, he not only reshaped the image of Japan's imperial family, but also left an indelible mark on the world stage. Stay tuned, because the story of Akihito's reign is far from over, and there's plenty more to uncover about this remarkable emperor who quietly but profoundly transformed Japan's place in the world. And speaking of remarkable transformations, let's dive into a lesser-known facet of Akihito's multifaceted life, the one that involves fins and gills rather than crowns and scepters. Yes, folks, while most emperors might be content with a ceremonial wave or a state dinner, Akihito was busy peering into tide pools and scribbling notes on marine life. This wasn't your average emperor's pastime. We're talking about a full-blown passion for marine biology, a field where Akihito made waves, pun very much intended. Before you roll your eyes at the idea of an emperor moonlighting as a fish enthusiast, consider this. Akihito was no mere dabbler. He was a bona fide scholar, with papers published in scientific journals. We're talking about serious, peer-reviewed stuff, not just some hobbyist's blog. One of his notable contributions, an extensive study on the taxonomy of goby fish, those small, bottom-dwelling creatures that most of us wouldn't give a second glance to, but which fascinated Akihito to the point of obsession. In 2005, he even went so far as to name a newly discovered species of goby, Exerias akihito, after none other than his wife, Michiko. Now, if that isn't the ultimate love letter, I don't know what is. Forget diamonds. Real love, it turns out, is immortalized in the scientific nomenclature of a small fish. This little aquatic tribute was more than a romantic gesture. It was a testament to their partnership both in life and in the scientific community. But how did Akihito balance this fishy passion with his imperial duties? Well, imagine juggling a microscope and a crown. Not your everyday balancing act, but one that Akihito managed with surprising finesse. The Emperor's life was a constant dance between the ceremonial and the scholarly. One minute, he'd be donned in formal attire, attending a state banquet, and the next, you might find him in a lab coat, knee-deep in research about fish migration patterns. In a way, Akihito's scientific endeavors were a clever counterbalance to his royal obligations. While the pomp and circumstance of imperial life were inescapable, his marine biology work allowed him a rare escape into a world governed by the laws of nature, rather than the rigid protocols of royalty. It was a form of intellectual freedom that perhaps kept him grounded amidst the grandeur of his title. And let's not forget the symbolic weight of an emperor so deeply invested in ecology. In a world increasingly aware of environmental issues, having a monarch who genuinely cared about biodiversity added a layer of modern relevance to an ancient institution. It also subtly underscored the message that science and tradition need not be adversaries, but can coexist harmoniously. Now, let's add some context to this science-loving sovereign. Japan, being an island nation, has a deep cultural and economic reliance on the sea. Its maritime traditions are as old as the country itself, making Akihito's focus on marine biology particularly resonant. During a period when environmental concerns began creeping into global consciousness, Akihito's work was not just a personal passion, but a nod to the broader challenges facing Japan and the world. Yet, true to form, Akihito's contributions to the field were never about seeking the spotlight. Here was a man who could have easily used his status to draw attention to his scientific work, but he chose humility, letting the research speak for itself. His papers, often co-authored with other scientists, were grounded in meticulous research rather than grandiose claims. It was as if he was saying, "Look, I might be wearing a crown, but in this lab, I'm just another guy trying to understand these fish." This duality of roles, emperor and scientist, also showcased Akihito's ability to transcend the confines of tradition. In a society that often idolized its leaders to the point of deification, he was refreshingly human, someone who got as excited about a new fish species as he did about diplomatic achievements. It was this very humanity that endeared him to the Japanese public, a nation that valued both its imperial heritage and its post-war modernity. So, there you have it. An emperor who wasn't just content to sit on his throne, but who also embraced the curiosity-driven life of a scientist. In doing so, Akihito not only expanded the boundaries of his own intellectual pursuits, but also subtly redefined what it meant to be an emperor in the modern world. He showed that even the most traditional roles could evolve, moving with the tides of change, rather than standing rigid against them. And as we continue to explore Akihito's reign, let's remember that this wasn't just about wearing the crown. It was about wearing many hats, from those of a scholar to a statesman. The emperor's life was a testament to the idea that true leadership involves a balance of tradition, personal passion, and an unwavering commitment to one's values. So stay tuned, because there's more to this story, and Akihito's legacy is far from finished. And speaking of moving with the tides of change, let's dive into one of the most jaw-dropping moments in Japan's recent history, Emperor Akihito's decision to abdicate the throne in 2019. Yes, you heard it right. He did what no emperor had done in over 2 centuries, a move as unprecedented as a sushi chef declaring their love for peanut butter. The idea of stepping down voluntarily from the chrysanthemum throne was about as traditional as a karaoke bar in a Buddhist temple. But Akihito, ever the modernizer, once again broke from the mold. His decision to retire gracefully from what is arguably the world's longest-running job was both a personal choice and a seismic shift in the cultural and legal landscape of Japan. We're talking about a country where tradition is as solid as Mount Fuji and as weighty as a sumo wrestler's diet. So why did Akihito decide to abdicate? Well, at the ripe age of 85, he cited his age and declining health as reasons, an honest admission that he might not be able to fulfill his duties with the same gusto as before. And let's face it, after nearly 3 decades of being an emperor, who wouldn't want to take a step back? Imagine being in a role where every public appearance is scrutinized more than a detective novel's plot twist. Even the most enthusiastic ruler might fancy a little downtime. Now, before you get the wrong idea, this wasn't your average clerking out scenario. Akihito's abdication required a legal overhaul, as the existing imperial household law made no provisions for an emperor to retire. This wasn't just about Akihito wanting to hang up his crown. It involved drafting new legislation to accommodate his wishes. In 2017, the Japanese Diet passed a one-off law allowing only Akihito to abdicate, a legal acrobatics display that would impress even the most seasoned bureaucrat. This move stirred the pot in a society where the emperor's role is steeped in Shinto beliefs and historical significance. The last time an emperor stepped down voluntarily was in 1817, when Emperor Kakaku left the throne, a time when samurai were the influencers of the day. Fast forward to Akihito's era, and the landscape had shifted dramatically. Japan was no longer an isolated feudal state, but a global powerhouse with a penchant for technological innovation. The world had changed, and Akihito's decision reflected this evolution. Culturally, Akihito's abdication was monumental. It challenged the notion that the emperor must serve until death, a tradition as old as the imperial line itself. By choosing to step down, Akihito humanized the role, demonstrating that even the most revered positions can adapt to the times. It was a reminder that even ancient institutions must sometimes bow to the realities of modern life. The public's reaction, largely supportive. Many Japanese citizens saw Akihito's decision as a compassionate choice, reflecting his desire to ensure the stability of the imperial family and the nation. It was a move that resonated with a public grappling with its own aging demographics. With over 28% of Japan's population aged 65 or older, Akihito's choice mirrored a national dialogue about aging and responsibility. And speaking of responsibilities, let's not forget the economic context surrounding this decision. Japan, in 2019, was a country balancing innovation and tradition, much like Akihito himself. With a GDP hovering around $5 trillion, it faced challenges such as deflation and an aging workforce, the latter perhaps more relatable to Akihito than he'd like to admit. His abdication was not just a personal milestone, but also a reflection of the broader societal shifts occurring in Japan. Now, let's address the elephant, or perhaps the imperial carriage, in the room. Akihito's abdication sparked discussions about the future of the imperial family, particularly regarding the role of women. As of 2023, the Japanese imperial family had dwindled to just 18 members, with only 3 potential heirs to the throne. The law of succession, which permits only male heirs, has been a topic of debate, with Akihito's decision adding fuel to the fire. Could this be the catalyst for change? Only time, and perhaps a few more legislative debates, will tell. In the meantime, Akihito's decision to abdicate was a masterclass in balancing tradition with modernity. It was as if he had taken a page from his own playbook of soft diplomacy and applied it to his personal life, navigating a complex web of cultural norms and legal barriers with the deftness of a seasoned diplomat. His abdication was not just a personal decision, but a statement about the evolving nature of leadership in a rapidly changing world. It's worth noting that Akihito's decision paved the way for his son, Naruhito, to ascend to the throne. Naruhito, born in 1960, represents a new generation of emperors, one poised to carry forward the legacy of modernization and international engagement. As Japan's first emperor born after World War II, Naruhito embodies the country's post-war evolution, a symbol of renewal and continuity. And so, as we wrap our minds around Akihito's historic abdication, let's not forget the indelible mark he left on Japan and the world. His choice to step down was a testament to his enduring influence and a reflection of his commitment to evolving the imperial role. In a move that was both surprising and inevitable, Akihito redefined what it means to be an emperor in the 21st century. As we continue this exploration of Akihito's reign, there's more to uncover about the legacy he's left behind and the path forward for Japan's imperial family. Stay tuned, because the story of Akihito's impact is far from over, and his decision to abdicate is just one chapter in an ongoing narrative of transformation and renewal. And so, as we wrap our minds around Akihito's historic abdication, let's not forget the indelible mark he left on Japan and the world. His choice to step down was a testament to his enduring influence and a reflection of his commitment to evolving the imperial role. In a move that was both surprising and inevitable, Akihito redefined what it means to be an emperor in the 21st century. Now, let's talk about the legacy of Emperor Akihito, a legacy as enduring as Japan's love affair with vending machines. You know, those marvelous contraptions that can dispense everything from hot coffee to fresh eggs, embodying the nation's flair for efficiency and innovation. Akihito's reign, much like these ubiquitous machines, was all about accessibility and modernization. He shattered the myth of the emperor as an aloof and unreachable figure, proving that even the most venerable institutions can adapt to the times. First off, let's tackle the myth-busting. The image of the emperor in Japan has traditionally been one of divine detachment, a figurehead who is seen but not heard, much like a silent film star in a world of talkies. Akihito, however, rewrote that script. He wasn't content to be a mere ceremonial presence. Instead, he became a symbol of peace and understanding, often stepping into international affairs with the grace of a diplomat and the sincerity of a true statesman. Take, for instance, his 1992 visit to China, where he expressed deep sorrow for the suffering caused by Japan during World War II. This wasn't just a polite nod to the past. It was a pivotal moment in Japan's post-war diplomacy, a sincere gesture in a complex geopolitical puzzle. His words were as carefully measured as the ingredients in a delicate sushi roll, balancing regret with the hope of reconciliation. Akihito's contributions to promoting peace weren't limited to international diplomacy. Domestically, he worked tirelessly to foster understanding and unity within Japan. This was a country that had risen from the ashes of war to become an economic powerhouse, yet it was still grappling with the shadows of its past. Akihito's reign was a beacon of reconciliation, a reminder that acknowledging history is just as important as forging new paths. And speaking of new paths, let's not ignore Akihito's passion for scientific inquiry. While most emperors might find solace in palatial gardens or grandiose ceremonies, Akihito found his in tide pools and marine biology texts. His fascination with goby fish wasn't just a quirky pastime. It was a testament to his belief in the value of scientific exploration. In a world that often glorifies the grandiose, Akihito's dedication to the minutiae of marine life was a refreshing departure. His scientific pursuits were more than just a personal passion. They were a statement about the importance of curiosity and knowledge in an ever-evolving world. Akihito showed that even an emperor could be a lifelong learner, proving that the pursuit of knowledge is as crucial as any state affair. It's almost poetic, really. An emperor who dove beneath the waves of tradition to explore the depths of scientific discovery. Now, let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. Akihito faced his fair share of challenges, both on the home front and abroad. The economic miracle of Japan's post-war boom eventually gave way to periods of stagnation and deflation. The so-called lost decade of the 1990s saw Japan's GDP growth plummet, a sobering reminder that even the mightiest economies can falter. In the midst of this, Akihito remained a steadying presence, a symbol of continuity in a rapidly changing landscape. His reign also saw Japan grappling with its identity on the world stage. As the nation navigated its role as a global economic leader, Akihito's approach was one of quiet diplomacy and soft power. He understood that Japan's influence could be wielded with grace rather than brute force, a lesson in humility that resonated far beyond the borders of the island nation. And let's not overlook the social context. Japan's societal norms were also shifting during Akihito's reign. The once rigidly hierarchical society began to embrace more egalitarian values, a transformation reflected in Akihito's own family. By marrying Michiko, a commoner, he set a precedent that rippled through Japanese society, challenging long-held notions of class and tradition. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of Akihito's legacy is his humanity. In a role often shrouded in mystique, he was refreshingly relatable. Whether it was his visits to disaster-stricken areas or his candid moments of interaction with the public, Akihito's reign was characterized by a deep sense of empathy. He wasn't just an emperor. He was a leader who understood the importance of connection in a world that often feels disconnected. So, as we bring this journey through Akihito's reign to a close, let's remember that his legacy is one of transformation and renewal. He proved that even the most traditional roles can evolve, that leadership can be as much about listening as it is about leading. In a world where the past and present often collide, Akihito charted a course that honored both, leaving behind a legacy as enduring as the neon lights of Tokyo. And just like those vending machines that dart the Japanese landscape, Akihito's reign was a reminder of the power of adaptability. He showed us that even the most storied institutions can find new ways to thrive, embracing change while staying true to their roots. So here's to Emperor Akihito, the man who turned the tides of tradition and left an indelible mark on Japan and the world.